Supergod, create Civilization 0. Kesha is stunned. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51. Release the two-dimensional foil and fight to the death. Seeing that Karl hung up the call, Hui's mouth twitched slightly at this time. It was the other party who called him over, and it was the other party who provided him with two engines that gave him great confidence, and he could go to war with Blue Star. It can be said that the current result is entirely due to Karl. But in this situation, Karl actually ran away. That's right. He ran away, and ran away without a trace. He didn't care about him at all. Let him wait for death here. And the reason why Karl ran so fast, because he was afraid that after Hui was caught, Lu Xuan would come over along the network cable to hit him. At least don't let the other party see his face. Otherwise, the other party might really do it. At the beginning, Karl didn't think so, but now he really thinks so. Taking a deep breath, Karl's eyes were a little worried. If Hui is caught, won't he give out the money? He said softly, thinking about how to prevent Hui from escaping completely. At this time, Hui looked at the empty universe. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly. He brought hundreds of warships with him. When he came, each of these warships can start a small war. If it is against a low-level civilization like the Earth, 2 warships are enough. But now, he has become a commander without troops. All the warships were destroyed. Only Xiangan 1, where he was left standing there. This world seems to have become a little different. He took a deep breath, with a little worry in his eyes. Then, through the screen in front of him, he saw the huge binary neutron war star outside. Wang, what should we do now? Our fleet has been completely destroyed, and only we are left. One person, so Molly said in a panic. Although he did not die in the attack just now, 587, but now he still feels fear, panic, and helplessness because he has no idea what to do next. Or he can't do anything. With his current physical fitness, he can survive in the universe for a while. But the time is not much. After all, he is only a second-generation divine body now. After that period of time, the only fate waiting for him is death. Are you owning? Also looked at the scene in the distance, but he did not speak. Instead, he frowned slightly. He seemed to have anticipated his own death. So in this situation, he knew that it was useless to say anything. Hui glanced at Sumali next to him, with a disgusted expression in his eyes. Now they are all in confusion, and the other party is still concerned about his life and death. Doesn't he know that he is going to die now? The double neutron astrology is too powerful. I have no way to resist it now. He sighed slowly. Now he doesn't know what to do. Looking at the huge double neutron astrology outside, his eyes are full of fear, and at the same time there is a little envy. In his opinion, if he can control that huge machine, then he will not fall into this end now. At least he will not be completely controlled by the other party. He will not be like this now. He could even take over the entire world with the twin neutron battle star, but it was just or thought. Because he had no other options now. The twin neutron battle star was slowly moving towards this side. The huge gravitational force caused Hui's battleship to tremble continuously. He didn't know what to do at all, because he knew he was dead. Even though he now had a 5th generation body, there was only one outcome waiting for him, and that was death. There was no other way except death. Angel civilization. Zhin saw this scene and laughed. Great, Hui really has no ability to resist now, and their entire fleet has been completely destroyed. There is only one person left, and Hui is no longer our biggest worry. His eyes flashed with excitement. After listening to his words, Kesha next to him also nodded. That's right, now we have no problems here. Everything is enough to change, but things are not as simple as you think. He is a 5th generation divine body after all. The power he has now is beyond our imagination. If he died there at this time, then it means that something bad is going to happen. Zhin looked at Kesha in surprise. What bad things are there? Isn't it the best for Hui to die? Looking at the other party's appearance at this time, Kesha shook his head slowly. Yi is indeed dead, and almost everyone around him will die. But what about us? We have such power now. Can we fight against it? No. Hua Yi is the second owner of the 5th generation divine body in the entire known universe. If he dies in that universe, then even I may not survive. This is the most dangerous place. After hearing his words, Zhi's pupils shrank slightly. Just now he only paid attention to Hua Yi's death, but apart from that, he didn't pay attention to anything else. And now it seems that everything has changed. If things really continue like this, then there is no other way waiting for them except death. Take a deep breath, with a little panic in his eyes. What should we do then? Can we just sit here and wait for Blue Star to attack? There should be a way to change this situation. We can't just wait here. Looking at his anxious face, Kesha shook her head again. Many things in this world are not so easy. What we see now has already changed. Just wait. This world will sooner or later become something we don't understand. And on Blue Star, there is only one way for us to resist. That is to research the two-phase foil. As he said, he looked at the figure walking over from a distance. This is Hexy. Easy came to Kesha's side with a little excitement in his eyes. How did you get the results? After hearing his words, Pixie on the opposite side also nodded. The results are out. I have already researched the curvature engine. With such a thing, we only need to install it on my warship, and we can also fly at the speed of light. And I'm now researching a more important thing. That is to compress the curvature engine and install it in the angel's body as a void engine. If this can be done, then this angel is likely to grow to the level of the 4th generation of God in an instant. But because it is only speed, the power is not enough, so it cannot reach the 5th generation of artifacts. But if it succeeds, it can be popularized, which is dozens of times faster than the ordinary method of advancing to the 4th generation of God. His eyes revealed extreme excitement. Obviously, for this, now finally a Blue Star technology has been researched, and it is extremely useful. And hearing his words, Kisafa only sighed at this time. Because he knew that what he wanted most now was not just the curvature engine. What he wanted most was actually the two-phase foil. Because only the two-phase foil can provide that extremely powerful killing ability. The curvature engine may be able to avoid the attack of the two-phase wave to a certain extent. But not all of them can avoid it. Demonic civilization. When Liang Bing saw this scene, his pupils shrank slightly. If Hua Yi is really killed directly under such circumstances, then we will not get any benefits. Chapter 52. Blue Planet's most advanced technology is exposed, shocking the entire Supergod Universe. Angel civilization. With such a huge weapon, this time it's definitely a fight to the death. I just don't know how Hua Yi can resist. He escaped the pursuit of the Gemini battle star and passed through the wormhole, but at this time, the situation he faces is obviously not so easy. His voice sounded slowly. At this time, he looked at the scene outside, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. For him, the situation here has already exceeded his imagination. Now he has also developed a curvature engine. Although he still can't fight with Blue Star, but at least he won't appear to cowardly. At least they don't have to be afraid of Xiangbo anymore. Xiangbo, such a thing is definitely beyond my imagination. Hua Yi is most likely unable to get out at this time. Kesha's voice sounded slowly, with a hint of smile in his eyes, and there was no color, except the smile. Because he understood completely. What he saw now was all known by himself. Everything he saw would not have too much explanation. And Lu Xuan's strength had exceeded their imagination. At least now they had no way to resist. Go and study new technology. I'll go with you this time, and try to study the two thin items in the shortest time. If you can study other technologies, that would be the best. Hearing Kesha's words, Heezy on the opposite side also nodded. Without saying much. Then, the two entered the laboratory together at this time. Only Zhin was left here. Looking at the scene outside, his eyes flickered slightly. Lan Crossing, how powerful are you? Or no one in this world can beat you. Earth. Jet. Xiaolan and the other two stood on the hillside. When they saw the scene in the distance, there was no other thought in their eyes except the desolation. Two-dimensional. Foil. If this thing is used, Huayi will not be able to escape. Such a cosmic rogue. We have never fought him. Why do I feel a little bit like him? Liu Chuang's voice suddenly sounded point. After listening to his words, Jezailan and Zaozin beside him looked at him at the same time point. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly point. They didn't expect that this guy was also a warmonger. Facing the eyes of the two, Liu Chuang laughed. Just kidding. Just kidding. Liu Chuang was of course joking, because he knew that with your current strength, you can't fight Huayi head on point. Maybe when he becomes the real Lord God, when he really has the ability to split a planet in half with an axe point, then he will have the power to fight Huayi point. But how long will it take? He didn't know. Blue Star. This time, he showed his powerful power in the entire universe, and the other part is obsession to fight to the death. If any of our civilizations provoke Blue Star, it is estimated that the final outcome will not be too good. This time, everything has changed. Zailan's voice slowly sounded point. He no longer had any thoughts of confronting Blue Star, because he fully understood how powerful the opponent was. This terrifying force was completely overwhelming for them. Point in this case, if they wanted to resist, then perhaps only death was waiting for them. Point it was unlikely to be more brutal than death. Point. After taking a deep breath, Jezailan did not say anything else. Point, because he knew that what he saw had already changed. Then everything he could see had also changed. Point. The entire universe had become different. It was no longer just the Earth that was in crisis, but all known civilizations as well. Point. Huai group. Point. Huai was sitting on Chianggang 1 at this time, breathing heavily. We escaped. This time, we finally escaped. His eyes flashed with extreme excitement. Point. He thought he would die there, but now he really escaped. Point. Such a scene made him have no other thoughts except excitement. Point. He understood that everything here had already changed, and what he saw was also so different. Point. He turned his head and looked at Sumali beside him. Which starfield are we in now? Investigate it and then drive to the known universe. We must return to the known universe. Given the current threat level of Blue Star, no civilization in the known universe can let it pass easily, because as long as it is allowed to pass, it means that there are enemies dying before and after, and it is very likely to come. Although, after running back, Kesha and his group will definitely attack me. I'm not afraid of them. Huai spoke very quickly. Point. After listening to his words, Sumali nodded. Opposite, King. As he said, he began to investigate this universe. Point, but his eyes flickered with a different light. Point. When they were attacked before, he saw the disgust in Huayi's eyes. The other party was disgusted with himself. Point. Faced with such a situation, he had no other way. Point, because he knew that he was just an ordinary existence to Huayi. Point. Perhaps he was one of the only few generals under Huayi. Point, but Huayi didn't care about him. Point. Ruining also stood up at this time and took the initiative to investigate the surrounding universe. Point. At this time, Ruining had no other thoughts except wanting to escape. Point. He was conquered by Huayi before, so he chose to follow Huayi. Point. Betrayed the entire female angel civilization. Point. But this time, he didn't plan to betray Huayi again. Point, because at this time, if even Huayi was betrayed. Point. Then he really had no other place to go. King, it seems that something is wrong. So Molly's voice suddenly rang. Point. Huayi hurried over, looked at the screen in front of him, and spoke. What's wrong? When we passed through the wormhole, except for some damage at the beginning, we didn't suffer any space shock afterwards. Isn't this good news? Huayi showed a surprised look, not understanding why Sumali said such a thing. Point, but Sumala's next words made her pupils shrink slightly. Followed from the wormhole, 10 sequins. Looks so strange. He seems to be that. What? That? Huayi came directly to the front of the observation deck and looked outside. Point. Then his pupils shrank directly. This is not a sequin. This is a two-dimensional foil. Blue Star actually released a two-dimensional foil to us. He wants to fight to the death with me. There was a panic expression in his eyes. He had never expected the result to be like this at this time. Zhangbo was already flashing a golden light. Chapter 53. Blue Planet is about to be renamed the Zero Universe. Invasion of the Supergod Universe. After hearing Hua Yi's words however, none of the figures on the opposite side spoke point at this moment. Hua Yi instantly understood that these people had betrayed him point at the end of life. No one is willing to give up their lives, even if their hope of survival is slim point. But at this time, they don't want to give up their last hope to Hua Yi point. After understanding this, Hua Yi's eyes gradually exuded a hint of anger, but he didn't act directly at this time point because he knew that everyone was wearing 4-dimensional armor. If he acted at this time, he might not be able to beat the dozen men in front of him. You'd better not regret it. Hua Yi snorted coldly and turned his head to look outside. Hua Yi is a person who will report any flaws. Now that these people have all offended him, he will never let these people survive. Well, but that's really not now. Impossible. There can't be a perfect weapon in this world. Since I can escape to the 4-dimensional space, then I can definitely escape from the world of binomial bow. I can definitely escape. Hua Yi said with a firm look. Maybe it is not a good person, but a scum, a being that everyone hates, but he has a great talent. Otherwise, he would not be able to become the Lord of the Heavenly Palace. Hua Yi finally glanced at his subordinates in the distance. He directly controlled the thinking armor and moved in one direction. He wanted to escape. His subordinates looked at each other. After seeing this scene, no one would regret their choice just now. They listened to Hua Yi before, because Hua Yi was the Lord of the Heavenly Palace. Now the Lord of the Sky no longer has his own fleet. The so-called Lord of the Heavenly Palace is called this commander without troops, so they don't need to listen to Hua Yi anymore. After they found a direction, they also started to move towards that direction. But all of them separated. Because they knew a direction, it was not necessarily accurate. And they were also afraid that others would sneak attack themselves and rob their energy. Earth dead. This time the guy named Hua Yi is really dead. Too scary. This world is beyond imagination. Even a main god is dead. The power held by Blue Star is too strong. Xiaolan said in surprise. At this time, he didn't know what he was going to say. Because the world he saw had already become something he didn't recognize. Liu Xuan held the god-killing axe in his hand. Why are we still practicing these weapons? The other side doesn't need people to appear at all. Just throw a few 2-item bets and we'll be dead. Hey, when can the earth stand up? Maybe when we are really super powerful, we can stand up at that time. Before that, we can only develop in a wretched way. Xiaolan's voice rang out. He knew that the earth had already changed. If you want the earth to develop peacefully, strength is necessary. In addition to those powerful strengths, there is more technology. Xiaolan turned his head and looked at Liu Xuan. Chuangzi, I'm going to study technology. As future hosts, all our computing abilities and talents are stronger than those of ordinary people. With our participation, the progress of research will definitely increase rapidly, he said softly, with a gleam in his eyes. After hearing his words, Liu Chuang's eyebrows twitched slightly. You go. I won't go. Tao Te Cheng has not really admitted defeat at this time. They still have a lot of guys making trouble on the earth, and in the west, the devil is also ready to move. No matter what, there must be someone on the earth to knock them all down. Okay, the two looked at each other firmly and then parted ways. They went to different directions. Xiaolan wanted to be the same as Lu Xuan. Liu Xuan just wanted to be a warrior angel civilization, Lord God, or the 5th generation of God body. This kind of existence, even if a civilization is launched, it may not be able to destroy it. Even if it is really destroyed, the other party can be resurrected after countless years. But now a Lord God may die directly in front of us. Blue Star, their technology is beyond imagination. Caesar spoke slowly, with a trace of helplessness in his eyes. He understood that this world is more different than he imagined. Up to now, what he can see has already changed. What he knows has also become at a loss. Technology is even more powerful than physical warriors. If we also studied technology instead of God body at the beginning, maybe we will grow to that level. Kesha's voice sounded slowly. However, after simulating such a scene in his mind, He shook his head. Point. If they really choose to do that, then the angels will never be independent. Point. The reason why the three kings war was one. Point. It is because the three of them have powerful strength. Point. Together, they beat Yi out. Point. If they rely on technology, they may not be able to do this. And if the angels are studying technology, other civilizations are studying divine warriors, the gap between the two sides will gradually widen. Point. Unless they grow to the level of Blue Star in a short period of time. Point. It is unlikely. Point. Because the reason why Blue Star can grow so smoothly. Point. It is actually more because there is no civilization around them. Point. But angels are different. Point. There are many civilizations around them. Point. Some are strong and they are blessed. Point. If they were studying technology at the beginning, these civilizations would not be able to watch them continue their research normally. Point. So in the end they can only take the current path. Point. But Blue Star has developed. Point. That terrifying power surpasses all of them. Enter emergency combat readiness. Blue Star after destroying Yi, it is very likely to head towards our universe. Now, they have become a super powerful civilization, capable of ruling the entire universe. If it weren't for their relatively short lifespan, perhaps we would never be able to overthrow their rule. And lifespan is our only chance. Kesha slowly breathed a sigh of relief. Point. Recently, this is the only weakness of Blue Star, because their lifespan is not long enough. Point. They are just the most basic carbon-based life forms. 100 years is their limit. Point. And they can survive this period of time. Point. Wait until the leader on Blue Star is replaced. Point. Perhaps they will have a glimmer of hope. Point. Demon civilization. Point. Liang Bing laughed loudly. Dead. Yi, this is really dead. A generation of main god. Even if he is a little stupid, he is also a main god, and it is very likely that he has been upgraded to the 5th generation of divine body. In this case, if he dies, then what should we do with the rest of us? Arnold, increase the intensity of the war so that the group of demons under our command can improve their bodies as soon as possible. If all demons can reach the level of 3rd generation divine body warriors, perhaps we still have the strength to fight. Yes, Queen. Arnold nodded, his eyes gleaming with brilliance. Point. However, although he nodded, there was a hint of helplessness in his eyes. Can the 3rd generation of divine warriors really fight against the two-phase foil? It's unlikely. Point. This is just one of their excuses. As for how much they can grow in the end, it depends on luck. Point. Yes, it's luck. Point. Now Arnold doesn't think that the power he and others have now can surpass Blue Star. They are no longer on the same level. Point. If you really want to surpass Blue Star, unless Blue Star's palm dies, but the possibility is not great. Chapter 54. The Ring World technology begins. Blue Star will become a huge battleship. Blue Star seeing his own value increasing rapidly. Point. Lu Xuan's eyes twitched slightly. Point. Because he later found that Yi's value was also included in his shock value. Point. This means that Yi is not dead. Point. Even in such a situation, he is still alive. Point. But he also understands that with the other party's current state, it is likely that he is hiding in the 4-dimensional space. Point. Although there may be no way to die in a short time. Point. But as the energy is exhausted, Yi will be repelled into the 3-dimensional space. Point. At that time, the entire range of the 2-dimensional foil will completely wrap it. Point. Let him have no resistance at all. Point. That time is the time of Yi's death. Point. So Lu Xuan was not too excited about this. He just needs to wait quietly. Point. But Lu Xuan also found something wrong at this time. Point. That is, his attack methods are still somewhat lacking. Point. Conventional attack methods can indeed rely on double astrology. Point. For large-scale attacks, two-phase foil is used. Point. But when these things fought against Yi, although they beat the opponent to a pulp, they could not completely kill the opponent. Point. Even Yi dared to attack him during the repair of Xuanzang's astrology. Point. This made Lu Xuan instantly realize that the technology of the entire Blue Star he mastered was not enough. Point. Although there was a deadline attack method that had not been used. Point. But this thing would cover everything in front of it. Point. If such an attack method was really used, the entire Blue Star would be forced to be imprisoned. Point. If he really faced such a situation, Lu Xuan would never accept it. Point. Taking a deep breath, Lu Xuan knew that he had to develop a system. Point. And what this system was, he had already known. Point. Ring World technology. Point. Before, Lu Xuan looked at the scientist opposite and asked, how is the Ring World technology being established now? Can the ring world technology be fully realized with the power we are using now. After listening to his words, the scientist on the opposite side raised his eyebrows slightly and spoke directly. Report to the commander. The resources we have now are still somewhat scarce. Under such scarce conditions, the ring world has already enveloped half of the galaxy. If you want to envelop the entire galaxy, it will take at least 5 to 6 years. Hearing the other party's words, Lu Xuan's eyebrows also twitched slightly. He naturally knew that the resources of the entire blue star were not enough. After all, he didn't know how many resources he had consumed to build various technologies. The resources consumed by Xuanzang's astrology alone far exceeded the total amount of resources stored in Blue Star. If he hadn't exchanged some resources before, the resources of Blue Star would have become scarce among the scarce. Lu Xuan thought for a moment and said to the other party, if I replenish all my resources for you, how long will it take you to completely complete the technology of traveling around the world? Hearing Lu Xuan's words, the scientist on the opposite side was slightly stunned. He didn't know how Lu Xuan should replenish this huge resource point, but since Lu Xuan had already said it, he naturally wouldn't say anything more. He just took a deep breath and spoke directly. According to our current manpower, if the resources are sufficient, it will take nearly 2 years. No, it's too slow. Lu Xuan shook his head slowly and continued, what? If all the personnel are assigned to you, and you are asked to do your best to develop the ring world technology, how long will it take? The scientist thought for a moment, and knew from Lu Xuan's words that Lu Xuan was anxious, so he raised his eyes and spoke brightly. 1 year. If there are enough resources and manpower, it will take at most 1 year to complete the construction. His eyes began to flicker. After listening to his words, Lu Xuan nodded slowly. If it only takes 1 year, the ring world technology can be completely completed. By that time, Blue Star is not afraid of other galaxies coming to attack. Even if it really encounters such a guy, the ring world is enough to completely kill those who dare to attack. Lu Xuan nodded slightly. Very good. I will give you sufficient resources and sufficient manpower next, and you must complete it within 1 year. As for what resources you need, tell me after you have sorted them out. Hearing Lu Xuan's words, the scientist opposite was full of excitement. Understood, Chief. Lu Xuan's eyes flickered slightly. As long as the ring world technology is completely built, there will be no problems on their side. Lu Xuan fully understands this truth. At that time, he can go directly to the universe. Contact all the civilizations on the south side of the river at that time. No matter which civilization faces him, they can only express submission. Lu Xuan fully understood this, so there was no light in his eyes, except excitement. With the system, he has turned an ordinary blue planet into what it is now. In just a few years, this has fully demonstrated the ability of the system. Lu Xuan knew that one day he could become the master of the entire world. At that time, cross-dimensionality must be studied to go to other dimensional universes. However, Lu Xuan also understood that this would take time, and he did not need to do this in a short period of time. Lu Xuan fully understood that Huiyi was able to find him, and it was definitely not relying on his own ability. Because Huiyi's civilization did not have the ability to explore his location. So there must be someone helping him. And the only person who can do this in the entire known universe is one person. Karl. And Karl's own ability is not good. He relied on the big clock to determine the location of the blue planet. Lu Xuan fully understood this. So in this case, he must create a ring world. Otherwise, wait until Karl really creates a two-phase war using the big clock. Then throw one directly at the location of the blue planet. Although Blue Star now has many ways to escape the attack of the two-phase fight. But then it must leave its current location. Such a situation is absolutely unbearable for Lu Xuan. So now he must use other methods to change this, and the so-called ring world is actually a huge spaceship. This spaceship includes the entire galaxy. In other words, when the ring world is successful, the entire galaxy becomes a whole. and the core is naturally blue star at that time. If blue star wants to move, then as blue star moves, the entire galaxy will move with it. Point in the entire universe, blue star is indeed moving point, but people in blue star cannot feel this movement point even in their opinion. Blue star has not moved at all point, because everything they can see around them, even everything they perceive, has not changed point. This level is the real ring world, which can truly ensure that blue star can survive better in this world. Point Lu Xuan surprisingly has such an idea. Point for Lu Xuan, everything that happens here has already been stipulated point in his regulations. This world will not have any different changes. The impact of other civilizations on blue star will be minimized. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55. The creator of the Zero Civilization. Kesha was terrified. Demonic civilization. Ring. World technology. If this is really completed, then blue star will become an indestructible fortress. Liang Bing said with some surprise. He never thought that blue star had developed to this extent. Point after hearing his words, Arnold on the side said, indeed, if the other party succeeds, then there is no civilization on the entire blue star that can defeat them. Their technology is indeed a bit too powerful, but why does it feel a bit unreal? Can they really complete the so-called ring world technology on the entire blue star so quickly? 1 year may be very long for carbon-based life forms, but for us, it is just a short moment. In such a short time, how could the other party achieve such technology at this time? Arnold said with some confusion. Point after hearing his words, Liang Shu's brows also frowned slightly. You are right. No matter how you look at it, it is impossible to achieve such technology in a short time. But if it is blue star, then everything is different. In fact, we all know that the whole world has long been different. The technology mastered by blue star is more powerful than all of us. Even the other party's invention of technology is much faster than ours. What we need hundreds, thousands or even tens of thousands of years to complete, the other party can do in a short time. So I don't think he should be bluffing. They can really do this. It's just a little too scary. Liang Bing's voice trembled helplessly. Point at this time, he finally realized that the entire blue star had already surpassed everyone's imagination. Point this is more powerful than they imagined. Point if the other party really allows the ring world technology. Point they will no longer have a reason to fight against blue star. They will no longer have the ability to defeat blue star, because the other party is already so powerful that it is beyond imagination. We must research those technologies as soon as possible. If we can't research them, then we can only passively take the beating in the end. Blue star has surpassed us too much. Liang Bing said slowly, with a little determination in his eyes. He understood that under such circumstances, the only thing he had to do was to change these situations. Otherwise, the demon civilization would be swallowed up by other civilizations sooner or later. Angel civilization. Point everyone looked forward. Point at this time, all the angels were stunned and opened their mouths. Ring world technology, turning the entire galaxy into a huge spaceship. How dare they? Why do they have such an idea? How did they do such a thing? Zixin said in surprise. Point he didn't understand why it turned out like this. After hearing his words, Kesha frowned slightly and said, if it were other civilizations, they might not be able to do this, but if it was blue star, it would be easier. After all, the power held by the other party is stronger than we imagined. The other party's technological armed forces are also beyond imagination. The only thing we can do is not to surpass blue star. We can only survive in the cracks under the rule of blue star. After saying this, Caesar's eyes flickered with more helplessness. He knew that the world had become different from what he imagined. Point what he saw also became different at this moment. Point what they had already become tattered. Ring world technology. They actually wanted to complete it within a year. This should not be particularly possible. After all, this kind of technology that affects the entire galaxy, the time consumed in a year is too short. Even blue star can't complete it. ZHI Zin said softly. His eyes showed that all this was impossible to complete. For him, the world is like this. However, after hearing these words, Kesha still frowned and shook her head. If it were in other places, it might not be possible, but at this time, what we see has already changed, so all this is likely to be accomplished. I don't know what the world we see will become, and I don't know what the world we see will become. In short, Blue Star can do this. They are definitely not bluffing, because all the technologies they mentioned before have already been completed. There is no need to bluff with us at this time. After all, they even killed Huayi, so this ring world must be real. After listening to his words, none of the angels present spoke again. Because they all knew that the matter was over now. What they saw has already changed. They have no way to change these. The only thing they can do is to study quickly. As long as they can study what they want within the specified time. Then everything will be fine. Otherwise, when Blue Star comes, they will really be passive. Earth. Jezai Allen looked at the picture in the sky, frowning slightly. What is he talking about? The ring world, which can turn the entire galaxy into a huge spaceship. How big is this spaceship? If someone wants to attack this spaceship, won't they just die? How much energy is needed? Jezai Allen didn't want to say it. Every time he said it, he would be surprised, and it would increase. At this moment, he didn't know what to say. Because everything became unusual. Angel Yan stayed beside him and glanced at Jezai Allen. No one knows, because although we have seen such technology, it still takes too much time to do all this. So, in this case, we can't even do anything. He took a deep breath, and there was a little warmth in his eyes. The angels now have no way to crack those technologies. It will take at least 1,000 years. After hearing Yan's words, Jezai Allen couldn't help but open his mouth wide. He never expected that even the angels would need thousands of years to crack those technologies. Then, if it was their Earth, wouldn't it take tens of thousands of years? Perhaps less than 10,000 years is not enough. Then, can we only wait for Blue Star to attack us? Although they don't have such an idea now, such a situation may occur later, after all, when they are strong enough. Other civilizations are weak civilizations. No one will remain calm in the face of a weak civilization. Jezai Allen said helplessly. The angel Yan on the opposite side just sighed and didn't say much. They looked up at the giant screen in the sky. The scene on the giant screen shocked them every minute and every second. Liang civilization. Delina looked at Pan Zhen on the side at this time. Because of the power we have now, how can we solve this problem now? I remember that Blue Star is short of energy. What they are developing now should consume a lot of energy. In the current situation of Blue Star, they should not lack a lot of energy, which leads to the inability to develop new technology. But what is the situation now? The other party is actually making a ring universe very quickly. Wouldn't the production of the entire galaxy lead to further shortage of their resources? What is going on? Why can't I understand it? Listening to Delay's words at this time, Pan Zhen on the side glanced at him. Who knows, maybe Blue Star has found some new energy. After all, our exploration here is not as fast as we imagined, and the giant screen in the sky is not broadcasting live every moment. So, in places we can't see, they may have studied new energy development technologies. So, in this case, their energy will be endless. Otherwise, it is impossible that their energy is generated out of thin air. Chapter 56, Latitude Control, the technology that really changes the world. Master, the ring world is fully prepared. An old scientist looked at Lu Xuan and said excitedly. After listening to his words, Lu Xuan nodded slowly. He naturally knew what the other party was talking about. He also understood what the other party's words meant. He had seen it before, but the other party had not had time to report it. You have worked hard. You can have a good rest during this period. Lu Xuan's voice just sounded, and the scientist on the opposite side did speak hesitantly. I don't think it's time to rest yet. Why? Lu Xuan looked at the other side curiously, and the scientist on the opposite side continued. It's the two-phase foil. Now we have the two-phase foil, but now there are other civilizations. Then other civilizations may also have something like the two-phase foil. After having this thing, if we meet each other, we will fight directly, and we will just throw the two-phase foil. By that time, the entire universe may become the territory of the two-phase foil. And the only thing we can do is stay in the universe and watch the other side. Although we can avoid this attack, the surrounding universe will gradually be covered by the two-phase wave. By then, we will have nowhere to go. There are traps everywhere. Looking at the other party's worried look, Lu Xuan also nodded slightly at this time, because he knew that what the other party said was right point in this world. Many things have become different point. If there are really other civilizations that also have two-phase foil point, throw it directly to him point, then the two-phase foil he has here is naturally not comparable to the other party point. Take a deep breath point before Lu Xuan looked at the other party and then spoke. Things are not as simple as U033 imagined, or it's not as difficult as everyone thinks. Yes, the territory generated by the two-phase foil is strong enough. We can solve it. Do you mean that the binomial wave can be turned into a two-dimensional territory and then changed back? But after our previous tests, this is unlikely. The scientist on the other side was full of surprise and confusion, and didn't understand what was going on at all point. After listening to this, Lu Xuan showed a mysterious smile. Some things are not impossible, but they have not been done. As long as someone does it, everything is possible. You mean the reason why the two-dimensional foil is an unsolvable thing now is because no one in the entire universe has done it, so everything is like this. Then, if someone in this universe can do it, wouldn't everything change? He said curiously, with a deep surprise in his eyes, and Lu Xuan nodded slightly at this time. Yes, others may not be able to do this, but we can do it. You know, the two-dimensional world and the three-dimensional world and the four-dimensional world are actually no different in essence. It's just the gap in dimensions. Perhaps in the eyes of ordinary three-dimensional life, this gap cannot be solved, but if we can solve this gap, then everything will become possible and ordinary. Looking at Lu Xuan's calm appearance over the years, the scientist opposite showed a deep surprise on his face. He didn't understand what Lu Xuan was talking about at all. All of them are three-dimensional life. Why are two-dimensional life and four-dimensional life the same at this time? He hesitated for a moment and suddenly spoke. You mean that three-dimensional life can also become two-dimensional life? Lu Xuan looked like a teachable child. Under his influence, the other party finally became not so stupid. Now he can gradually keep up with his thinking. After seeing Lu Xuan nod, the scientist on the other side frowned. Impossible. How could it be like this? Every civilization has its most basic appearance. Even three-dimensional life has many races. They cannot be directly transformed. If three-dimensional life can be transformed into two-dimensional life, then they will lose a concept. At this time, can he really be considered as his original self? Seeing the other party fall into a puzzled expression, Lu Xuan smiled slightly and then explained. In fact, what you said is not true, because we can completely change two-dimensional creatures back. In other words, as long as three-dimensional life can be converted into two-dimensional life at will, and then can be converted back to three-dimensional life, then there is no need to fear the two-dimensional foil, because in the two-term foil, except for two-dimensional life, no creature can survive at all, but two-dimensional life can survive in it without any problems. Seeing the other party's calm face, the scientist was surprised and had no idea what it meant. At this time, this scene was also spread to various universes by the system's repertoire. Angel civilization. Are you kidding? Three-dimensional life can be transformed into two-dimensional life. This is the essential difference of life. It is much stronger than the body upgrade. Is there really such a capability? Why don't I understand it at all? Zin said in surprise. He didn't understand what was going on at all. At this time, Kesha thought for a moment and suddenly spoke. Obviously, if it were us, we might not be able to do it, but if it were Blue Star, it would probably be able to do it, because if he couldn't do it, then he wouldn't have come up with such a concept. In this case, we don't even know what kind of changes will happen to this world, and they are already studying the transition from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions. Why does it feel a little too scary? If the other party can really reach that level, doesn't that mean they can enter 2 dimensions at will? If you add the mind armor, you can enter and exit 4 dimensions at will. Is this really still a living being? Kesha took a deep breath, and at this moment she didn't quite understand Lu Xuan's thoughts, because he really didn't understand what kind of changes would happen. Zixin was also full of doubts, and he didn't understand it either at this time. His eyes were just a little curious, and the curiosity was more of a little surprise and complete incomprehension. Earth. Jezai Allen looked at the scene in the sky and frowned. Impossible. If it turns into a 2-dimensional creature, then the 3-dimensional life should become something else, right? Are they really still themselves? Hearing his words, Zhao Zin next to him spoke. Zin, Yi, I don't believe that Blue Star can really research such a thing. They are definitely bragging. Zhao Zin was carrying a big gun on the side, with a look of disbelief. Seeing his appearance at this time, Xiaolan also sighed helplessly. It is clear that on the entire Blue Star, only his own realm of thought is the highest. Others are a little worse. Chapter 57, Blue Star's Ambition, Restarting the Universe. Do we really have to become 2-dimensional? By then, we will probably become lambs to be slaughtered, and after becoming a 2-dimensional creature, will we still have the consciousness we have now? I always feel that it is a little unreliable. The scientist on the other side said helplessly. If possible, he definitely does not want to become a 2-dimensional creature. Because in his opinion, if he becomes a 2-dimensional creature, then what he sees will definitely be different. The whole worldview will also change dramatically. Even if he can change back in the future, it is still uncertain whether he is still the same. After hearing the other party's words, Lu Xuan smiled slightly at this time. I just said that civilization can become a 2-dimensional civilization creature, and it can also become a 2-dimensional creature, but it does not mean that we have to do this too. This is what other civilizations have to do to avoid the 2-dimensionalization of the 2-phase foil. As for us, have you forgotten who invented the 2-phase foil? After hearing this, the scientist on the opposite side showed an expression of sudden enlightenment. Yes, the 2-phase foil was invented by Lu Xuan. So, Lu Xuan actually invented this thing and used it. That means Lu Xuan must have the ability to solve all of this in this case. The power displayed by Lu Xuan is absolutely beyond imagination. So they also felt a little bit of excitement, and there was more excitement in the excitement. Chief, can't we restore the 2-dimensional universe to the 3-dimensional universe? It's just that it's too difficult. Although we can upgrade the 3-dimensional to the 4-dimensional, the 2-dimensional universe is a completely different existence. These two are not the same technology at all. Looking at the other party's puzzled look, Lu Xuan smiled at this time. Indeed, it is very difficult for other civilizations, but for us, it is not so difficult. Since I have the ability to make the 2-phase foil, I naturally know how to upgrade the 2-dimensional space to the 3-dimensional ability. When we master this power, we won't have to be afraid of the 2-phase foil anymore. Looking at Lu Xuan's excited expression, the scientists looked at each other. They all imagined that if they really had such power, then the other party would throw a 2-phase foil over, and they only needed to change the surrounding space back directly while turning it into 2 dimensions. Then there would be no problem. Thinking of this, they were also excited. Waiting for Lu's explanation. Before Lu Xuan smiled at this moment and spoke directly. Haven't you ever thought about what the universe was like at the beginning? At the beginning of the universe, there must have been various dimensions, not just these few dimensions. Even more than a dozen dimensions are possible, and as time goes by, it finally became what we are now, and what we have to do, our ultimate goal is to raise the dimension of the universe to the initial moment. Demon civilization. It's unlikely that he wants to turn 2-dimensional space into 3-dimensional space. If such technology really exists, then Blue Star will become the strongest existence in the world. There is no life in the entire known universe or unknown universe that can fight against him, and they actually want to upgrade the dimension to the initial moment. No one knows how many dimensions it was at that time. What are they doing? Are they completely joking? Arnold shook his head slowly. He didn't understand what Lu Xuan wanted to do at all. After hearing these words, Liang Bing frowned slightly at this time. Unlike others, he had different ideas in his opinion. This world has long become something they don't understand. So, in this case, all the changes seem to be just calm and ordinary. But if this world can really be turned into a two-dimensional one again, then this world may become different. At least in their sight. Everything will be different. If Lan Shan can really do this, then I really don't have to be afraid of Xiangbo. Even. Not only don't have to be afraid of Xiangbo, even other things, they don't need to be afraid, as long as it is a weapon related to dimensions, they can easily crack it. But, is the truth really that simple? I always feel that what the head of Blue Star said this time is indeed a little bit unsuccessful. Liang Bing frowned, not understanding what was going on at all. He felt that Lu Xuan could not succeed. This is just a luxury. For them now, the only thing they know is the 4-dimensional space and the 5-dimensional space. The 6-dimensional space above becomes a little difficult for them. At least they can't understand it at the fastest speed. Even if someone explains it to them, they have to think hard for a moment before they know what the 6th dimension is. It may not even be possible to understand it in their lifetime. At this time, the other party's goal is to rise above the 6th dimension, or even more than 10 dimensions. So, who can know? The answer is that no one knows. Angelic civilization. They actually want to raise the dimension to the highest level, but no one knows how high it is. Then, by that time, everything that Lan Crossing has done may be in vain. Lan Crossing's palm actually has such ambitions. As expected, it is not an ordinary existence. Kesha said softly, with a little light flashing in his eyes. For him, the current situation of Lu Xuan is beyond imagination. If the other party studies the ability of weapons again, then for them, the only thing to do is to prepare for war. Even if they fight with the other party for a moment, they may be defeated directly by the other party. But for the other party, everything is always so unusual. My queen, what should we do now? This world seems not as simple as imagined. The only thing we can do now seems to be waiting. Zixin, on the side, suddenly spoke at this time. After hearing his words, Kesha shook his head slowly. What we see is different, and the dimensions we occupy are also different. For us now, we are standing at the highest point in the known universe, not to mention that there is no such guy as Yi now. So, now we are the strongest civilization in the known universe, no one else. Chapter 58, Transfer of all civilizations, the last hope. Earth. Jedi Allen looked up at the sky. Now, we have no other way. The only thing we have to do is to study the future of the Earth. We don't need to do anything extra. We just need to grasp everything in our hands. We must quickly develop the 2-dimensional foil curvature engine and the ability to change 3-dimensional life into 2-dimensional life. Only by learning these can we truly regain our foothold in this universe. Otherwise, there will be no place for the Earth in the entire universe. At this time, Jedi Allen said slowly, and he finally felt a terrifying time. Now the Earth has become a target of public criticism. If they can't develop powerful enough technology in a short period of time. If they can't show the most powerful power under such circumstances, the only thing they can do is wait. Waiting for the final outcome. The arrival of death. Rose turned her head and looked at Jedi Allen. Then she nodded slowly. Yes. This world will eventually become different, and what we have to do is to make this difference become us, not others. Work hard. As long as you stand at the highest point, you can change everything. At this moment, Jedi Allen was silent. He looked up at the sky and saw only things he had never seen before. But he himself didn't know what he could see. Perhaps Blue Star has surpassed them. Perhaps he has ideas that can surpass Blue Star. What will be the final result? Only they know. So, under such circumstances, everything fell into calm and silence. Demon civilization. Liang Bing's brows frowned slightly. Finally, he shook his head slowly and spoke to Arnold next to him. Put away all the things you prepared. We can't attack Kesha next. Hearing his words, Arnold showed a surprised look. Why? We have been preparing for so long, and the probability of killing Kesha is as high as 65%. Just give up like this, isn't it a pity? Queen, hearing Arnold's words. Liang Bing on the opposite side shook her head. The situation is not as simple as you think. What we see is actually different. If I'm not mistaken, Kesha is now preparing to move the entire angel civilization. Because he doesn't know when we can research the two-phase foil, so we have to move our position. Under such circumstances, it has become extremely difficult to find him again. He is no longer the arrogant Kesha before. With the death of Norton, Kesha has become extremely calm and vigilant now. The three technologies we are researching are the most important now. The two-dimensional foil is used for attack, the curvature engine is used for escape, and the ability to convert three-dimensional life into two-dimensional life. These things are urgently needed now. Only by researching these things can we dominate the universe again. Otherwise, if the other party suddenly throws a two-phase foil, we have no other way except death. So, leave here and do what we should do, instead of staring at Kesha here. I may still want to kill that B***** ***ch Kesha, but not now. We need a long time. Civilization. Karl's eyes were a little bit terrified. The ring universe built by Lanzin has exceeded his imagination. In addition, he also discovered the ultimate goal of Blue Star. The other party wants to return the world to its most primitive state. That is, to return the universe to its original state. This is their ultimate goal of upgrading the dimension. It looks ordinary, but a closer look reveals that it is quite explosive. This terrifying existence has completely exceeded their imagination. In this situation, there are actually very few things they can do. For Karl, what he can do now. Only wait. In addition to waiting, he has one more thing he can do. That is to study those super technologies through the masters. Before he developed the curvature engine through the masters, although it is a castrated version. If you want to improve to the level of Blue Star, you have to wait at least for decades, but the castrated version is enough. In Karl's view, the biggest role of the curvature engine is superluminal navigation. As long as you have this power, you don't have to be afraid of anything. And if you want to travel at superluminal speed, it is not enough to rely on the curvature engine alone. You also need a sufficiently strong shell. Only such a shell can withstand that terrifying speed. And they don't have the compression technology of making water droplets on Blue Star, so the shell is average and extremely thick. Now this situation is the most suitable. If it is reduced, more curvature engines will be needed to drive it. There is no need to study the technology of curvature engines at all. Therefore, Karl set his sights on the two-phase foil. The two-dimensional foil is the most feared representative of Blue Star. This kind of thing is enough to completely destroy an entire civilization and seal it into a two-dimensional space. And this seal seems to be irreversible. At least he himself can't imagine how to change back in that case. He simply doesn't have such ability. As for the ability of Blue Star's palm to upgrade the dimension. He has no idea about this. That's right. They all upgraded the 3-dimensional fragments to 4-dimensional fragments before. But that upgrade was a fragment. If you want to upgrade the dimension of an entire space, or even the dimension of the entire universe. The difference is not a little bit. At least in the short term, he can't do this at all, and he doesn't even dare to think about it. What kind of terrifying technology does Blue Star have? Do they really think all this can be changed? Karl frowned deeply, with a look of deep surprise and incomprehension in his eyes. Finally, he shook his head. Walk towards the master. The big clock was not created by him, but by his teacher. Big head teacher. The master created by the other party is enough to change the whole world in many cases, which he himself has confirmed. In addition, there are not many other powers contained in the master after all. It is just a supercomputer. His most unique ability is that he can consume a lot of energy for super-dimensional calculations. In this way, such a level of ability can be used for super-dimensional calculations used to deduce the existence of some special places in the universe. To put it bluntly, it is a super standard simulation. A simulator that is stronger than those so-called overall warriors. It is precisely because of such a simulator that it is possible to simulate again and again and finally select the most likely one. And because the degree of simulation in the master is quite high, the probability of the most likely one occurring is far higher than 9.99%. In a sense, it is bound to succeed. But whether there is a deviation cannot be deduced. Because the deviation does exist. It is precisely because of this so-called deviation that Karl has not studied the real void. He is now in contact with the void, but this contact is fixed and slow. It's not that he hadn't tried to use the big clock to study the void, but the energy consumed. He found that, even if he sacrificed the entire universe, it would not be enough. But it was only used to crack a technology. Even if there were principles and technology to crack it. Then the situation became simple. Earth. Jezi Allen looked up at the sky. At this moment, the Teoti had retreated. Those guys ran away. As for why they ran away, he didn't know. Although he cared a lot, no one told him. Chapter 59. Blue Star arrives. All civilizations are afraid. Angel civilization. Kesha took a deep breath. At this time, he felt something was wrong. Blue Star had actually completed the construction of the ring world, and the Dyson sphere was directly installed on all the stars. This resulted in all the energy on the stars being used by them. For the angels, this was still beyond imagination. Because these angels had stood in this world for tens of thousands of years. During this period, they kept digging for energy, and of course there were battles, but even so, the energy they stored was huge. And Blue Star had now completely surpassed him. Then he didn't know what to say at all, and he didn't know what he could do now. Energy is the foundation of a civilization. No matter how powerful your technological energy is, it is still the most important one. Because only energy can make all things and the entire civilization develop together. Only energy can make their eyes gradually become excited. These things are undoubtedly stronger and more important. In addition, it is technology. Finally, it is people. However, Blue Star first developed technology successfully and then transformed energy. As for people, the other party should not be short of them. Even if there is a lack of such technology, it can be filled in a short time. Because everyone on Blue Star does not even need to work to get the materials for a lifetime. If they are just an ordinary reproductive machine, then they don't even need to do anything. Just stay. This is undoubtedly more than the angels, because here, no matter who is the angel, they must have enough value. This value is not just fertility. There are other things. More importantly, the value of creative ability. It is precisely because of these values, so a large number of angels will join the battle. The only ones who do not fight are very few. This is a current angel civilization, a civilization that has expanded to be extremely powerful. But it seems so weak in front of Blue Star at this moment. There are not many people who think there is any problem. Because for all of them, everything they see has changed. Become so ordinary, become so vulnerable. Blue Star, the energy it has now is absolutely enough. Even if it is used for dozens, hundreds or even thousands of years later, it is completely enough. They have covered the civilization of the entire galaxy together through the ring world technology. In this situation, they have no weaknesses or shortcomings at all. If we go to war with them, then there is only one thing waiting for us, that is death. Kesha 747 said softly, and the light in his eyes gradually dissipated. At this time, he had already discovered that the whole world had become something he did not understand. He could not understand this world, and could not understand everything he saw. The supreme technology he once mastered. In fact, it seems that you are so weak now, Queen. What can we do now? ZHI. Zin on the side said with some surprise. After listening to his words, Kesha frowned slightly. Finally, he shook his head slowly. It's still the same as before, developing those things at a faster speed. Study what we need at a faster speed, instead of waiting quietly like now. We can't overtake in other places, we can only catch up little by little, because for land crossing, everything is always so different. They have surpassed all of us, and we can't surpass them at all. Chasing is the only waypoint. After saying these words, his eyes flickered with helplessness. Once upon a time, Xianbian was truly the most powerful civilization in the world. Even the fiery sun star had to temporarily avoid the edge point, but now everything has changed. Blue Star became the strongest existence. The power that Blue Star possessed was beyond all others at this moment. They couldn't even see the unusual picture point at this moment. For them, everything became so ordinary and extraordinary. Try hard, we may say what we should do, but we will win more often. He slowly raised his head, with a little determination in his eyes, although he couldn't see where to win now. But he would not be defeated. He would only move forward little by little and win the victory he deserved. Apart from that, everything seemed so cowardly and so ordinary. Demonic civilization. There was a little shock in Liang Bing's eyes, and in this shock, there was more surprise. The whole galaxy is shrouded by Blue Star, and now they have no other ideas. 4. Blue Star, everything we see is always so ordinary and unsatisfactory. He took a deep breath, and his eyes flashed with pain. But he didn't know what to say. Queen, do we have the ability to surpass Blue Star? Arnold, beside him, trembled and said. After listening to Arnold's words, Liang Bing slowly shook her head. It's a lie to say it's impossible, but it's also impossible to say it's possible. What we see now is different from what we know. Wait. So that we can change these, or wait for Blue Star to perish, or wait for Blue Star to unify the entire universe. In any case, we have no way to change all this now. Everything has changed, and the devil is no longer as powerful as imagined. No, it's not that the devil is not powerful enough, but that Blue Star is too powerful. Arnold listened to these words. His eyes flickered slightly. At this moment, he didn't know what to say. At this moment, he didn't know what he should do. He understood that what he had seen before had changed. Individual combat power is no longer strong enough. On the contrary, those super technologies are truly powerful. They no longer attach all of this to one person. They just attached everything to a huge machine. 10 huge civilizations, and the individual is just one of the gears, the kind that can be replaced. Do you understand? I understand. There is no need to say anything more. Wait for Blue Star to make real changes. Liang Bing said softly. Arnold on the opposite side could only listen quietly. At this moment, there was not much change between them. There was not much imagination in their eyes for them. Everything is always so different. Earth. Jesiah Allen's eyes seemed a little dull. He studied all the technologies, and he found that these technologies were too far away for him. The distance made him unable to change at all. Because even if the other party was in front of him, they could not fully understand these technologies. They could only see that the other party was getting better and better, getting stronger and stronger, while they themselves are standing still. Chapter 60, The Ability to Expel the Universe, The Official Appearance of the Zeroer. Chapter 60, The Ability to Expel the Universe. The Zeroer officially appears. Blue Star. At this time, everyone gathered in a huge conference room. Lu Xuan stood in the front, and the group of people opposite looked at each other. At this time, I saw an old scientist stood up and said, I think we should give civilization a new name. Now, our civilization has occupied the entire starfield, which has formed a huge civilization. If there is no new name to symbolize our progress, I think it is still a bit backward. After all, there are countless other creatures in our starfield. He said slowly, looking at Lu Xuan in front of him, looking forward to Lu Xuan's agreement. And Lu Xuan thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. You are right. Blue Star does need a new name now. Do you have any ideas? There was curiosity in his eyes, and he wanted to know what kind of name the group of people in front of him could come up with. The scientist at the beginning spoke directly. The most powerful of our civilization is the Ring World, so why not call it the Ring World? I disagree. This technology is not only ours. Other civilizations may also be able to research it. After learning about it, I think it is better to call it a super-dimensional civilization. After all, our most powerful weapon is a dimensional weapon. Let's call it the Invincible Civilization. The strongest and most powerful. How about the Wanderer Civilization? Anyway, we are now wandering in the universe. I think it is better to call it Lu Xuan Civilization. The latter is concise and concise. Looking at these people quarreling directly point, the corners of Lu's mouth twitched slightly point. He didn't expect that this group of guys would quarrel at this moment point. After taking a deep breath, he hesitated for a long time point, slowly said, let's call it the Zero civilization. After all, our goal is to return everything to its original state. Let the entire universe reach the highest dimension and reach its original state. When Lu Xuan finished speaking, everyone on the opposite side looked at each other, all showing excited expressions. They may not listen to other people's words, but if it is Lu Xuan's words, they will definitely listen. Then, from today on, our civilization will be officially called the Zero Returner Civilization. This name is good, grand and classy. Should we spread this news to the entire universe to let them know the birth of our new civilization? Everyone was talking non-stop point, looking at the excitement of these people. Lu Xuan's eyes were also a little excited point. After all, this is the civilization he created with his own hands. He has grown from a small blue star step by step to the current behemoth point. Even in the entire universe, he has a place, and even reigns as the strongest point in this case. There is nothing wrong with Lu Xuan being a little proud point. Unlike others, he fully understands that what he just said has been spread to the whole world by the giant screen point. So he also understands everything he sees has already become different point at this moment. Blue Star is officially renamed Zero Civilization point. Other civilizations will also launch a sufficiently powerful technical siege on Blue Star. It's just that their technology is completely insufficient now, so they only get one thing in front of the Zero Civilization point, that is death point. If anyone dares to resist the Zero Civilization point, then they can't even hold on for a second point. Lu Xuan will make them completely disappear in the moment. Disappear in this universe, disappear under this world point. Angel civilization. What exactly does the so-called zero mean? Does it mean that they want to reset the entire world to zero and make it unified? Confidence said with some surprise. He didn't understand what this meant at all. No, if I'm not mistaken, this means returning the entire universe to its most primitive state. After all, the palm of Blue Star has such an idea, so in this case, turning the entire universe into the most primitive state is the foundation of the returner civilization. However, no matter what, the current Zero civilization has successfully stepped onto the stage of the universe, and our old civilizations seem extremely weak to the other side. Fortunately, the other side has not appeared in front of us yet, so we still have a chance. Even the other side may not be able to know our existence, so in the current position, our only way is to study technology as soon as possible. However, the Zero civilization is moving quickly. According to the speed of the other side's movement, it won't take too long, at most a few decades or even hundreds of years, for the other side to move to our side. The battle will be imminent at that time. Even if we surrender first, the other side will not directly gather us. At least from my point of view, facing unknown civilizations, even threatening civilizations, it is best to defeat them first. After hearing his words, Zixan's pupils shrank slightly point, because he fully understood that what Kesha said was exactly the situation they were facing now point. The entire angel civilization has entered a backward era point. They are no longer the most powerful civilization in the entire known universe point. There is another civilization that has far surpassed them point. Now the only thing they can do is wait point, wait quietly point. After understanding this, he took a deep breath. At this moment, he realized that the burden on his shoulders was heavy point, even if he was just a right-wing guard point, but the burden on his shoulders was already quite heavy point. Demon civilization point. Liang Bing saw this scene and smiled. Zero Return civilization. It's really interesting. Now the Zero Return civilization has moved towards us. It won't be long before we meet each other. At least we won't be completely ignorant of them. I just don't know what the leader of the Zero civilization will do. If they know that we have been watching their development with bullet screens, will he just catch us all and suspect that we have desecrated their technology? Or will he treat us kindly and help us develop quickly? Or will he just defeat us and make us their puppets? No matter which point, power is still the only thing we need to develop now. Only Enough power can change these, and only enough power can make us stronger. Chapter 61. Hua Yi's Fear. This time it's real exile. Zero a civilization. Lu Xuan's eyes flickered with excitement. At this moment, he could feel that the so-called dead silence was stronger than he had imagined. But how to test this dead silence now? After hesitating for a moment, his eyes flickered slightly. Now there is a very useful method. That is to throw the dead silence directly to the direction where Hua Yi is. Hua Yi himself was locked up in the two-dimensional space by him. Although he is hiding in the four-dimensional space now. There will be no problems in the short term. But as his energy is exhausted, he will definitely. So in this case, if the dead silence is thrown directly to the location of the two-dimensional space. It will only drive that area away. It will not cause any other damage. After understanding this, Lu Xuan's eyes lit up slightly. He felt that his idea was simply too useful. Lu Xuan looked at the scientist next to him and spoke directly. Now, throw this dead silence into the two-dimensional space where the birdman we attacked before is. This time, he should not be able to survive. Lu Xuan said softly, with a cold smile in his eyes. How serious is the situation on Hua Yi's side? He naturally knew this in the face of Hua Yi. She actually did not hesitate at all. He just wanted the other party to die completely and disappear in this starfield. Even if he did not propose the so-called dark forest theory. He would immediately defeat Hua Yi's fleet. Because he knew exactly what this guy was doing. If the entire universe is peaceful, then Hua Yi is the biggest thing that is not peaceful. This is not only recognized by Lu Xuan, who knows other civilizations. Therefore, he will not stay behind. He will only use all the power of 790. Now is naturally the best test opportunity. Angel civilization. After seeing this scene, Kesha's mouth twitched slightly. The leader of this zero civilization is really powerful. He doesn't want Hua Yi to live at all now. The other party hid in the four-dimensional space, and he just threw the thing that can expel space over there. Then, Hua Yi will be thrown directly into another world, excluded from this universe. All this is indeed more powerful than we imagined, and he is definitely in existence that will always destroy his opponents, he said slowly, with a little surprise flashing in his eyes. This surprise gradually spread. He understood that if the angel civilization he was in angered Lu Xuan. Then Lu Xuan would probably treat them the same way. First, use the two-phase foil to completely seal them. Then use the dead silence to directly expel them from this universe. In this case, he will never come back. At least it seems like this now. So powerful, and too outrageous. Zhizhen said softly, his mouth twitching slightly. At this moment, he also felt so different. He fully understood, but under the current circumstances, the zero civilization has become the public enemy of the whole world. Even if the other party does not know it, all civilizations have a natural resistance to the belonger civilization. Because the other party is strong, and the strong will inevitably be feared by the weak. Hua Yi civilization. At this time, Hua Yi was in that four-dimensional space, with his mouth twitching slightly. Why do you want to do this? You have turned all my men into a substance in the two-dimensional world. Now, you want to release this terrifying weapon here. You really don't want to let me go. Could it be that the Zero has already noticed that I'm not dead yet? Hua Yi thought secretly in his heart, but his eyes were in madness. He knew that under such an attack, he could not escape anyway. After all, the area where he was now had all become a two-dimensional space. He could only hide alone in the four-dimensional space and look for an opportunity to escape. And now, he didn't even find this opportunity. But at this time, the other party actually wanted to withdraw this space from this world. This was undoubtedly very difficult and painful for him. Not only him, but all the existences here would be thrown out. Like throwing away garbage. The only thing Hua Yi could do was to watch this scene quietly. Or go out directly at this time and make himself a part of the two-dimensional world. Maybe at that time he would not feel pain or fear. After all, the two-dimensional world might not be able to see the existence of the three-dimensional world. He took a deep breath, and his eyes flashed with more helplessness. This was really helpless, because he had no idea what this world would become in the end. He only knew that he would die in the so-called unknown space, Karl, it's all Karl's fault. If it weren't for him, how could I be fooled into attacking Lan Wutan? How could it become like this now? If I can go back, I think I will make Karl pay enough. All these costs are used to smash it and kill it. Karl, I don't want to let you go. Hooah. Yi roared loudly. Looking at the play, he looked at the slowly floating dead box. His eyes revealed enough fear. He knew that this time ZHI was really dead. At this time, under the gaze of everyone. The dead box just floated into the two-dimensional space. But it was not directly two-dimensionalized by the two-dimensional space. This scene made Lu Xuan's eyes slightly surprised. At this time, the scientist next to him explained directly. The box we encapsulate dead silence is also used to resist two-dimensional materials. It's just that this thing is easy to deform and cannot exist for a long time. Otherwise, we can install it on the surface of the planet to prevent such attacks. After hearing this, Lu Xuan nodded slowly. He naturally remembered this incident. After all the other party's knowledge was instilled from him. The other party knew it, and he also understood it completely. At this time, he was waiting for the final change of the dead silence. He knew that it would not take long before that area would be directly drained out. That was when the test was truly successful. Yi would also die completely at that time, and there would be no possibility of coming out. After thinking of this, Lu Xuan showed a little smile on his lips. After all, he helped this universe get rid of a big disaster. In Yi's astonished eyes, he saw something falling in front of him. It's just that the two sides are not in the same space. After all, it is now in the 4-dimensional space. And that thing is in the 3-dimensional space. It's even the 3-dimensional space affected by the 2-dimensional space. In short, it sounds very messy. But at this time, what he saw made him feel astonished. Because the box has been opened. The dead silence was directly stimulated. An invisible force instantly included the entire starfield. The next moment began to gradually eliminate this space. It was as if someone was cutting off the curtain of this space bit by bit with a knife. The speed was not too fast. But it was not too slow. In the sight of everyone, they only saw a little bit of movement. Then it was beyond imagination. At this moment, they felt an extremely strong sense of disharmony. This feeling made everyone feel a little surprised. They seemed to feel that the space was isolated. And this space was no longer a region. But under the gaze of the sight, there was no change. Gradually, when this feeling reached its extreme. The next moment, the space disappeared instantly. It was just a moment, and it disappeared without a trace. Everyone was a little surprised. They couldn't see clearly what was going on. They looked at each other, completely unaware of what was happening. Yi naturally didn't know this at this time. He could only see that he had come to a brand new starfield. Where is this place? He didn't understand what was here, and he didn't understand. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62. The new plan of the Zero Return Civilization. About to unify the Supergod Universe. Angelic civilization. This dead silence is quite explosive. If we encounter it, we will probably be teleported to another universe. No, it shouldn't be called teleportation. It should be called exile. After being completely exiled, we can't even come back. I thought they were a civilization that advocated peace, but now it seems that I was superficial. Kesha said softly, with a little light in her eyes. He had already seen the difference of Blue Star, especially the current Zero Returner civilization. Although the two sides are essentially the same, they are actually very different. No matter how you look at it, the former is just a planet, while the latter is a huge civilization. In this case, even angels but facing them, failure has become inevitable. So, in this case, how to study so many super powerful offensive weapons, no matter how you look at it. This has nothing to do with kindness and peace. Kesha has a more difficult idea about being in charge of the world's peace, order, and justice in the future. Originally, they had to fight against those civilizations that were weaker than themselves, and now there is a super powerful civilization that has researched countless terrifying technologies there. Only thing they can do seems to be chasing point after all. The other party has already taken all the technology was announced point of course. Whether you can learn it depends on yourself point at least in Kesha's opinion point he can still learn it now point it just takes enough time point he doesn't know how long it will take point he doesn't understand what the only thing he can do now point he only knows that for himself now point everything seems so abnormal point everything makes his eyes flicker slightly point the world has changed a long time ago point it has become something he can no longer understand. And he no longer knows how to do it point in addition to deep fear, they have other ideas at this time, Zixin said slowly. If we exchange all our technology with them, can we get the real and specific knowledge of those super technologies? If it is possible, just give us something useful to all of us. Can we become stronger? We can even rule this universe better. 21 As for the Zeroers, they should not be limited to this universe point hearing the other party's words. Kesha thought for a moment, and finally shook his head slowly. The situation is not as simple as you think. What we have now seems powerful, but in fact it is, so weak in many cases. Do you think the Zeroers can't develop this kind of body strengthening technology? I think it is completely possible, but the other party doesn't have such an idea now. When the other party's palm is about to die, they are likely to study the technology of body strengthening and life extension. At that time, the other party may be dismissive of what we have, so the only way is to chase it alone and master it all, he said slowly, with helplessness in his eyes, because at this time he finally knew what the world had become point it became what he didn't understand point it became what he felt helpless angels are no longer the only kings in this world, and it is even unlikely to be the king point demon civilization point Liang Bing's eyes flashed with more excitement point he is a person who worships the strong point for him, the appearance of the strong will exceed his imagination point only the appearance of the strong will make him more excited and excited point. And at this time, Lang Crossing is undoubtedly the strongest one point so now the Zeroer has become the object of his yearning point of course. The premise is that the other party will not pose a threat to them and even help them point and Liang Bing thinks that this possibility is not particularly high point after all. The demon civilization is not much different from Huayi's civilization point it is also a notorious existence in the whole world point it's just that they are not so evil point they are not simply disgusting point they have clear goals. So many civilizations turn a blind eye to them point but this does not mean that the reputation of the demon civilization is better on the contrary point they prefer to let a civilization fall into self-destruction point in short point the demon civilization is not very friendly point this is the common idea of all civilizations so if the Zero Returner civilization comes to this area and contacts them point then the demon civilization is likely to be the first target to be hit point and many powerful civilizations like to kill the chicken to scare the monkey point this point. Even their demon civilization likes to do point in the past. They were the human side point and now they are asked to be the chicken and they are naturally unwilling. My queen, why don't we take the initiative or change direction directly? Think about leaving in the opposite direction of the Zero civilization so that if the other party doesn't know us, it is unlikely that they will find us. Right after listening to the other party's words, Liang Bing actually started thinking point because he felt that the first method was nonsense and the second method seemed to be enough point he thought slowly, his eyes lit up slightly, and then he sighed slowly. No, if we do this, then other civilizations will also betray us. The danger we will encounter will be much greater than it is now. Unacceptable in this situation. So we can't do this. He took a deep breath, and there was a little helplessness in his eyes at this moment. He fully understood what he was facing point it was fear, panic, and all the sad emotions mixed together. What is Blue Star going to do now? Are they going to destroy all civilizations? Liang Bing thought with some surprise. Point Zero civilization. At this time, Lu Xuan took something from the scientist point this is a death box point, but this death box is much bigger than before point it looks like it can completely swallow up a huge starfield point just when everyone was afraid that Lu Xuan would attack them point Lu Xuan really did it point, but he did not throw the death box to other civilizations instead. He threw it to his own Zero civilization point after the terrifying cut appeared point the Zero civilization disappeared in the Next moment point a huge black hole was left in the original place point at this moment. All civilizations were stunned point he never expected that Lu Xuan would commit suicide point Earth. Ah. You kidding? How could he commit suicide directly? Ah. They kidding? Could it be that they want to hide in another space to avoid the detection of this world through such a situation? Or they are afraid of other super civilizations and do not want to contact those civilizations, so they plan to solve it once and for all. Xiaolan's mouth twitched slightly. I don't think it's possible. They probably have other ideas in this situation. After all, he is the leader of the Zero civilization. He is not a rubbish. How could such a person abandon everything and run away after building so many huge weapons? Liu Xuan next to him shook his head slowly point he didn't think such a possibility would happen point in his opinion. There was a high probability that there were some other changes in this situation point, but he didn't know what kind of changes it was, so he could only guess. Zaozin glanced at him. Who knows? A world will always have different changes. No one knows what he thinks. Chapter 63. The Zero civilization is completely successful. The super gods are all stunned. All changes are for the better. Lu Xuan definitely understood this truth point. In fact, he looked at the void around him point. A slight smile appeared at the corner of his mouth point at this moment. He did not feel that he was dead point because he saw a completely different scene. Commander, we have now entered this unknown void, but why do we do this? Ah. We waiting here for death. The scientist on the opposite side hesitated and spoke point. After listening to his words, Lu Xuan slowly shook his head point. What he was waiting for was naturally not the so-called death point. He looked at the huge red star in the sky point. This is another void, and he didn't know where it was, but he could find the place where he came from. We are different from the previous civilization. We took the initiative to enter this unknown void, and we also know where we are. Then we naturally have the ability to go back there. It won't be like other civilizations, unable to go back. This is not exile. This is absolute protection. Lu Xuan's voice was calm point. After hearing his words, the scientists present were all stunned for a moment, and then their eyes lit up point. They all figured out what Lu Xuan said point. Just as Lu Xuan said point at this time, this place is not the so-called exile point. Perhaps for other civilizations, they were exiled to this universe and didn't know how to go back point. But for Lu Xuan, there is no exile here, only salvation point. They took the initiative to enter this void point, so from now on, their location is intertwined with this void point. As long as this location is determined, there is no danger. Then, when the known universe encounters any danger, you can take the initiative to jump over. This is Lu's idea point. Both bold and sincere point. He slowly raised his head and spoke to the people around him. Explore our previous location, and then jump back directly. Got it, Chief. The people around all showed excited expressions. They no longer hesitated and began to explore the previous coordinates. Other civilizations can't find it point, but the civilization they are in can definitely find it point. Earth point. Xiaolan was lying on a piece of black steel point. This was the latest super tech weapon developed by their Earth point. Although it was super tech, it had not reached the speed of light at this time point. However, it should still be possible to cross the universe point. Since the Teoti civilization left point, the abilities they now possessed were much stronger than before point. According to Xiaolan's own guess, at most 30 years they would be able to completely master the space navigation technology point. There would be no problems. Of course, the premise is that other civilizations would not suppress the Earth point with the Angel civilization. They thought that they would not do so for the time being point. As for the Zero civilization point, they no longer cared about each other point. It was not because they could despise it in their hearts, but because they valued it too much point, and they knew that they could not be compared with each other at all point. In this case, the two sides were not at the same level point. The only thing they could do was to wait, and there was nothing else besides waiting point. So in this case, there was no need to do anything at all point. They just had to wait point. A moment later, the Zero civilization suddenly appeared in its original position point. Looking at the suddenly appeared Zero civilization point, everyone felt extremely surprised point. Demonic civilization point. Liang Bing stood up directly with a look of astonishment on his face. This is what he really thinks. Let them teleport to an unknown star. In this case, no one knows where they will be except themselves, and they have the ability to return to this area at will. Damn it, the current blue star is invincible in a sense, he said slowly, with more fear in his eyes. In fact, he didn't know what the world could become. He understood that blue star was truly invincible. The Zero civilization was superior to all civilizations in this case, even if they really learned the two-way fight, this terrifying technology. But they were still weak in front of blue star, still vulnerable. In the confrontation with blue star, they had no way to find each other. But the other party could easily find their location. In this case, the only thing they could do was nothing. After taking a deep breath, Yuanshu finally sighed helplessly. It seems that the Zero civilization has now transcended the entire civilization. Even if all of us are added together, we may not be able to fight against it, he sighed slowly, and the helplessness in his eyes had burst to the extreme. After hearing these words, Arnold next to him also turned his head and looked into the distance. Then, he shook his head helplessly. Indeed, this world is even more different than I imagined. Even if we have mastered those special civilizations now, we don't have much ability to speak of. Zero Returner civilization, they are beyond things. There was vigilance and depth in his eyes, but there was still no fighting spirit. As a generation of war god, what Arnold wanted most was to fight for Liang Bing with a sword in hand. He did this before. Even in some cases, he destroyed an entire country. But now he knows he can't do it. The most he did was to destroy a country. And those super powerful civilizations would destroy a civilization with a wave of their hands. The gap between the two sides is too huge. So big that he doesn't know how to chase. Everything is always so ordinary. Blue star will be invincible in the end. Angel civilization. Caesar's eyes flickered with more helplessness. So that's it. Is this their purpose? Now the entire blue star can freely travel between the known universe and the unknown universe. Except for themselves, we don't know where they will appear. In this situation, both sides have directly undergone huge changes. Even if we change our positions, we are still in the known universe. The other party only needs to detect a rough location and throw a few two-dimensional foils over. For us, only death is waiting. But we don't even have the ability to resist. Even with these two foils, the other party can easily dodge. Damn, this is the civilization of the returnees. He surpassed all of us, making us discouraged and unable to catch up. Kesha said softly, with a little speechlessness in his eyes. How is the research on that technology going? After listening to his words, Zhangxi slowly connected. There is a bottleneck that cannot be broken through for the time being. At this moment, Caesar's eyes gradually became dim. He understood that a gap had appeared. They really had no chance of defeating Blue Star. It was not really possible. Directly teleport all their strong men to the interior of Blue Star, then launch super standard weapons. For example, the Sword of Judgment of Skyblade. It was enough to blow the entire Blue Star into pieces. Chapter 64. Angels are all experimental subjects. Who are ye as crazy? Earth, we need to research new technologies. Their mobility is too terrifying. We haven't researched any technology, but the other side just keeps on working. Under such circumstances, our gap will get bigger and bigger. Xiaolan said speechlessly. He originally thought that the situation would change this time. But who would have thought that the other side's research speed of technology was not slow at all. Even in the eyes of everyone, the current Zero Returner civilization has reached the stage of Supergod. That is, even if the gods stand in front of them, they will most likely be directly blown into pieces instead of being able to completely destroy them. This terrifying ability is a limit for all civilizations. No matter which civilization, if it gets such power, it will most likely take a good rest. At least those researchers will not research the next thing non-stop. But for Blue Star, they did not retreat at all. Instead, after a few words from the palm of Blue Star, they began to research new technology. It's so terrifying. If the hands of Blue Star were people on our Earth, wouldn't Earth be a bunch of galaxy hearts, German spears, and no Star War gods? Zao Zin, who was standing beside him, also said with some sighs after hearing his words. Everyone present was silent. Because everyone knows that at the beginning, Blue Star and Earth were not much different. In this case, there was not much difference in strength between the two sides, but even so, after such a long time, the entire Blue Star has surpassed the limit. It is completely beyond their reach. In addition, Earth is still the same as before. It has not even developed a so-called technology. In this case, the gap is getting bigger and bigger for Zaozin and others. Such a scene undoubtedly makes them feel helpless, but apart from helplessness, they have no other way. It seems that this is all we can do. I just don't know at what level the Zero Returner civilization will stop researching. It's impossible for everyone to become a god, Jesiah Allen said with some sigh. Then, he didn't say anything more. He just watched the scenes in the play quietly. He wanted to learn those techniques before, although he was watching, but he only saw the results. But now he wants to see the process. Lu Xuan was explaining to the scientists the knowledge about the transformation of three-dimensional creatures into two-dimensional creatures. He wanted to remember all of this in his mind. He wanted to use his wisdom to learn this knowledge. So as not to let them fall into the terrifying confusion. His eyes were slightly bright, and there were dots of 520 letters in his eyes, and the other people around saw Jesiah Allen's appearance at this time. No one said anything. The palm of Langsing is a savior of Langsing. And Jesiah Allen is considered by everyone to be the savior of the Earth. It's just that he has never lived up to the expectations of those people. Even now he became strong enough. Even now he even has a certain connection with the angels. But even so, the gap between them is still too big. So big that he sighs and doesn't know what to do. So he has to learn everything about Blue Star and make the Earth the next Blue Star Zero Returner civilization. A large number of scientists gathered together regarding the dimensionality reduction of three-dimensional life. The matter of two-dimensional life is not particularly difficult for them. Because before, they can be said to have started their family with dimensional ability. In this case, they can quickly research the same dimensional ability. Basically, there won't be any big problems, but that's all. Because now they have a little problem. This problem is very simple. That is, they can't test. That's right. They now have the ability to reduce three-dimensional life to two-dimensional life. But if you want to upgrade two-dimensional life to three-dimensional life, the difficulty is not just a few times, even hundreds of times at least with their current technology. It is not yet available. In this case, if it really becomes a two-dimensional life, it will be difficult to change back. Maybe you can wait for them to develop that technology, but this process is long. And no one knows, even if it really turns back to a three-dimensional creature, will the other party be affected by the two-dimensional world? All of this makes them seem a little entangled. Really don't know what to do now. It was when they were thinking about what to find as a test. In the distance, Lu Xuan came over. Seeing these people with a tangled look on their faces, he asked directly, "What, is there a problem now?" Hearing Lu Xuan's words, he looked at the scientist opposite him and spoke directly without hesitation. "Commander, we have now thoroughly researched the technology to transform three-dimensional life into two-dimensional life. It's just that the experimental materials have not been found. But there is no way to conduct sufficient experiments. This makes our research unable to go further." Hearing the other party's words, Lu Xuan's mouth gradually showed a smile, and he spoke softly. "I thought it was something else. If it's experimental materials, don't we have ready-made ones?" Hearing Lu Xuan's words, several people present looked at each other. They didn't know what Lu Xuan meant. After a moment, the scientist in front of him spoke tremblingly. "Master, are you talking about those death row prisoners? We can turn them into two-dimensional creatures, but they may not be willing to cooperate with our research. In this case, the effectiveness of our research will be greatly reduced," he said softly, with helplessness in his eyes. He had thought about this before. But after thinking about it for a while, they found it unreasonable. At least with what they have now, there is no way to test it. But Lu Xuan smiled and shook his head. "I'm not talking about those death row prisoners, but something else." Everyone present looked at each other. At this moment, they had a lot of thoughts in their minds. He frowned slightly at the scientist in front of him, and he suddenly thought of something. That is people who dedicate themselves to science. There are many people on the blue star, but there are not many people who are willing to dedicate themselves to science. But all these scientists are willing. For them, if they can dedicate themselves to science, it is not impossible. Although it looks a bit boring, they are really willing. The scientist in front of him raised his head and said with several other scientists with a firm face, "We are willing to dedicate everything to the experiment." Looking at these people, they looked excited. The corners of Lu Xuan's mouth twitched slightly. He said slowly, "I'm not talking about treating you as experimental subjects. You are all the pillars of our zero civilization. If all of you become experimental subjects, who else do I need to study?" After hearing Lu Xuan's words, everyone present breathed a sigh of relief. Although they were willing to be experimental subjects, they were a little scared if they were really used as experimental subjects. After all, no one knew whether they could change back. At this time, Lu Xuan's words not only proved their value, but also made them feel extremely fortunate. Fortunately, they found a leader like Lu Xuan. If that's the case, who are our experimental subjects? The scientist at the front still showed a surprised look. He didn't understand what Lu Xuan was talking about. And the corners of Lu Xuan's mouth slowly curled up at this moment. He said softly, "Who else could it be? Of course it's our dear bird people. Aren't they all hiding in the 4-dimensional space? For them, this is a deadly situation, and we can save them. Of course, the premise is that they are willing to be experimental subjects." Chapter 65. Zero Returner. Overcoming all civilizations. In the sky. Under the gaze of everyone. Ruining and others all exposed their positions. That's right, except Hua Yi. Everyone exposed their positions because they understood that this was their only hope for survival. Then, this only hope would naturally not be abandoned. After all of them came out. Lu Xuan directly had someone throw it with dead silence. These things are the possibility of saving them from those 2-dimensional spaces. After they were rescued. Then they were taken to the laboratory without stopping. Ruining and Sumali were still looking around at this time. They wanted to escape. But after seeing the situation around them clearly, they were stunned. There was no powerful existence around them. There were only some ordinary carbon-based life forms, but they were wearing some 4-dimensional armor. The power generated by these things was enough to knock all of them down. Especially when Hua Yi was not there. Therefore, Sumali and Ruining observed it for a while and knew that they could not escape. When they came to the laboratory. A terrifying light suddenly enveloped their bodies as the button was pressed. The bodies of these angels gradually turned into 2-dimensional forms. That is, the legendary Paperman. There was a little panic in their eyes, and these panics flashed different pictures at this time. They found that, although they had become paper men in a 2-dimensional form. But now they can move. Move freely. This state doesn't seem to be bad. It just feels like I understand less. Ruining and Sumali looked at each other. They began to cooperate with the scientists in research. They found that with their own abilities, it was impossible to turn into a 3-dimensional form. If they really want to change back, they can only rely on these scientists at this time. This scene was naturally exposed to all civilizations by the play. Angel civilization. After seeing this scene, Kesha slowly frowned. Those angels are actually of the same origin as them. Although they are only male angels, they are also the existence that all of them hate. But these existences were the same race as them a long time ago. Now seeing these male angels turned into such a situation. They naturally feel a little sad. Not to mention that there is also a Ruining in it. Ruining is a female angel. But she has an inexplicable feeling for Hua Yi. That's why she turned to the male angels for Kesha. She was once her sister, but now she is an enemy. Zixin said slowly, "They are now like this. If we meet them, will we become like that? Or is it possible that we will be turned into 2-dimensional life by them in the future?" Zixin sighed helplessly. At this time, Kesha looked at him and nodded slowly. "Indeed, from the current situation, our situation is undoubtedly different. They have all been turned into 2-dimensional creatures. As angels, we will not be too different, but we can't let this situation go." Kesha shook her head slowly, with a little vigilance in her eyes. "We must develop our technology and make it surpass the current situation. Otherwise, the final outcome will be unbearable. Notify them to study the technologies of Blue Star as quickly as possible. Otherwise, sooner or later, we will follow in their footsteps. After listening to his words, the eyes of others also flickered slightly. At this moment, they had no other ideas. They just wanted to develop technology quickly to avoid becoming that kind of existence after Blue Star attacked. Otherwise, the entire angel civilization would be directly destroyed. Earth. Jedi Allen looked at the scene in the sky, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. Those are all angels. Although they don't look like good people, they are indeed angels. These beings are all super soldiers on average, but now they have all become like this. If we encounter Blue Star, wouldn't we not be able to hold on even once? Jedi Allen said in surprise. There was more helplessness in his eyes when the others saw his look. They were all speechless. There is nothing we can do in this situation. After all, the technology mastered by Blue Star surpasses all of us. In this case, we can only wait for all kinds of negotiations with Blue Star. Wait for them to be kind. Wait for them not to attack us. Rose's voice also sounded at this moment. Jedi Allen turned his head to look at Rose with a little light in his eyes, but then he became a little calm. He knew that according to the current situation, the relationship between him and Rose must be postponed. After all, they can't do these things now. Researching technology is our only way now. Only after all those technologies are successfully researched, maybe we can change the current situation. I don't know what other civilizations think, but they probably have the same idea. Jedi Allen said slowly. At this time, his eyes revealed more helplessness because the strength of Blue Star has exceeded their imagination. In this case, the only thing they can do is wait. Maybe they can study those technologies, but now the bottleneck has appeared. No civilization can surpass that bottleneck. Everyone looked at each other with a little helplessness. Originally, with the help of the Supergod Academy, they should be able to improve the Earth step by step. Finally, they can be on par with other civilizations, or even arm wrestle. This is the essence of the establishment of the Supergod Academy on Earth. It is also what all of them want. However, the situation has changed. Now the situation here has exceeded their imagination. What else can we do now? Zao Zin's voice sounded slowly. At this time, he waved his big gun, but there was not much excitement in his eyes. Although this big gun looks strong. In fact, it is indeed strong. When facing some super soldiers of the same level, he could even use this big gun to penetrate the opponent directly. But that's all. Facing Blue Star, the superpower beyond fear, the only thing he could do was to wait. There was no other way except waiting. Everyone fell into silence. They looked at the huge screen in the sky. There was helplessness in their eyes, and in the helplessness, there was more calmness. They had no way to change these, so calmness became the final situation. What do you think will happen to Huayi? At this time, Jedi Allen spoke slowly. After hearing his words, the eyes of others also flickered slightly. Huayi is now 5th generation divine body. After taking over the 4-dimensional space, no one should be able to disturb him. Under such circumstances, as long as he doesn't come out, he is almost invincible. So, under such circumstances, even Blue Star should not have any special way to deal with him. Chapter 66. The creation of the Zero civilization is complete. Swallowing the Supergod Universe. Styx civilization. Karl's eyes were a little surprised. They actually let the male angels be the experimental subjects, but Huayi, that guy, still ignored this point as before. He is really crazy, arrogant, and stupid. In this situation, he didn't try to escape from that abnormal state and survive, and he still thought he was arrogant. It's really not a pity for him to die, he said coldly, with a little boredom in his eyes. For him, there is indeed a connection between him and Huayi. But his relationship with Huayi is actually a mutual benefit. They are not even allies, because both sides look down on each other. And now that Huayi has a problem, it is not a bad thing for Karl. It can even be considered a good thing. In this case, Huayi can't threaten him often. Although that kind of threat looks quite funny to Karl. But After installing a black hole engine on the other party and promoting him to the 5th generation of divine body warriors, Karl also found that Huayi was a little beyond his imagination point, at least with the power he has now. He can't destroy Huayi head on point, but if we count his ability behind the scenes, he can still trap Huayi to the point of not being able to find his edge point, for example, this time point, although he also spent a lot of energy. Several technologies and part of the Teoti warships, but other than that, there is nothing else point just relying on these. He directly caused Huayi to suffer inevitable losses for Huayi point. Such a situation undoubtedly made him feel angry and helpless, but he couldn't do anything point. Karl slowly breathed a sigh of relief, with a smile in his eyes after Huayi was imprisoned. He seemed more relaxed point, although he encountered some things that made him feel a little helpless. As long as Huayi was still there, he could 533 to a certain extent drag down the zero returner civilization point. He fully understood this truth point. For the vast majority of existences in this world point, if they want to kill a 5th generation divine body head on point, then the energy and resources they need to consume a huge point. In addition, Blue Star now has no super standard power for close combat points, so if they want to eliminate Huayi, they can just use some encirclement tactics or long range super specification strikes. These things will not reveal Huayi's existence no matter whether he is dead or not point, because the two sides may not even have communication point. But at the same time, he also felt a little helpless. Most of the angels have been turned into 2-dimensional creatures. These 2-dimensional creatures will greatly reduce their strength point. But in addition to this, there are still some different changes. For example, the power he has mastered point. The total amount of these powers will not be reduced point. Perhaps in a head-on confrontation, the 2-dimensional angels cannot fight against themselves in normal circumstances, but they also have some conveniences. I don't know whether it is good or bad. Anyway, the current Blue Star has exceeded my imagination. If you want to fight against Blue Star, you still need to research all those technologies. At least you must have the ability to protect yourself before you can fight against it. Otherwise, if the power you have now is against Blue Star, there is only one possibility, that is death. Karl said softly. He had discovered this a long time ago. According to the capabilities they have now, if they want to force a battle with Blue Star, he will definitely die. No, maybe he can't die because of his special physical condition but the Ming civilization he created became a ruin in an instant. This is what Karl didn't want. Maybe he didn't want to study the civilization for any special effect. He created the Styx civilization more to help himself study the void point. But if the Styx civilization is broken, it will lose a lot of resources. It will definitely be a serious injury to him. Zero return civilization. Several scientists came to Lu Xuan and reported. Report to the chief. Our people are now proceeding smoothly. The experiment of transforming 3-dimensional creatures into 2-dimensional creatures is doing quite well. They didn't die, but they really survived as 2-dimensional creatures. It's just that they have lost some knowledge and some abilities, and are weaker than before. But even so, ordinary 3-dimensional creatures cannot cause a devastating blow to them, and we know that their leader, the guy named Huayi, does not intend to surrender to us. The other party has different ideas, perhaps preparing how to retaliate against us, and the other party is the so-called 5th generation divine body, which has the ability to survive in 4-dimensional space for a long time. According to our current situation, imprisoning Huayi so that Huayi cannot find him in a short time is the best choice. After hearing the other party's words, Lu Xuan's eyebrows raised slightly. Then he nodded and spoke. The current situation is obviously a little different, but what we have to do is not that simple. Next, use heat death to attack it directly. What is heat death? The scientists on the opposite side looked at each other, and some did not quite understand what Lu Xuan said. And Lu Xuan directly exchanged it from the system, and all the knowledge of heat death began to slowly explain. The so-called heat death is a superpower that can cause a great degree of thermal change in the current area. In this case, all the energy in a short period of time will turn into heat, and this heat will cause a great change in the current space. Few creatures can survive in it, or there are no creatures at all that can survive in it. Now, I will teach you about the creation and use of heat death. Just attack directly when the time comes. Hearing Lu Xuan's words, the scientists on the opposite side looked at each other and then nodded repeatedly. They knew that Lu Xuan had found new scientific and technological knowledge again. Perhaps for other people, such a situation is unlikely. But for Lu Xuan, this is a very simple thing. The kind that will not cause any problems after that. They began to study and produce heat death closely. They planned to use a suborbital bombardment on Huayi directly after the production was completed. Let the opponent be completely extinguished. Instead of being in a state of lingering in the four-dimensional space. A trace of smile appeared in Lu Xuan's eyes in panic. He knew that everything would change. And this time, he wanted Huayi to die. Angel civilization, heat, death. They can also study this kind of thing and use it for themselves. If I'm not mistaken, heat death is a mode of the ultimate form of the universe, which makes the entire universe fall into the most terrifying destruction. And now, the other party can actually use this power directly, which is unlikely. To this day, he said in surprise. At first, he felt that there was nothing wrong with it, thinking that this was one of the special powers possessed by the civilization on Lu Xuan's side. But after thinking for a moment, he suddenly found that something was wrong. The angels had also studied heat death. For them, they suddenly found that heat death was the ultimate form of a civilized universe. At that time, the entire universe would emit a sharp heat. This heat would evaporate all the creatures in the world. Then all the matter in the universe would evaporate and return to the void. After countless years of changes under a certain coincidence, a new cosmic civilization would be reborn. This is like a cycle. And heat death is a terrifying force that can end the cycle or restart the cycle. This force represents the power that can destroy the entire universe. It seems so now. I have studied some knowledge about the Earth before. Their ideas and research on heat death are basically the same as ours. At least they are talking about the same thing. And the blue star was not much different from the Earth. So the heat death is definitely the same thing as the heat death we know. Chapter 67. Heat Death Canon. The End of the Universe. Earth. Jezai Allen looked at the scene in the sky, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. He turned his head to look at Angel Yan beside him. Why do I feel that I can understand every word, but when they are put together, I can't understand what they say? What are they talking about? What heat death? Can this thing really have enough lethality to Huayi? Even from what he said, it seems that it can destroy the universe. After hearing his words, Angel Yan rolled his eyes helplessly and nodded. This is the situation. You can understand heat death as an energy conversion effect under a special state. The effect is to convert all energy into hot heat energy, leaving nothing behind. In this case, the terrifying high temperature will evaporate and melt everything, and when this range reaches the entire universe will return to a state of nothingness. A nothingness full of flames. In this case, all living things, everything will disappear, and everything will return to the end. This is an ultimate power that is enough to destroy the universe. It's just that in general, it only exists in theoretical knowledge. No one would think this is true, but if the Zero civilization researches it, then everything is likely to become true, he said in panic, with a little surprise and helplessness in his eyes. Others may not understand this, but he does this kind of thing that everyone just brags about and makes up a theory casually. But you actually researched it. It undoubtedly made them feel quite surprised and not quite understood. But more of it was shock. I see. Then if there is such a thing, will Huayi really not be able to escape this time? In theory, he is now hiding in the four-dimensional space, and nothing can harm him. But if this heat death cannon is used to bombard him, Huayi will also be directly heated into powder or directly heated into steam, right? I don't know if he has the ability to revive. He should not be able to be directly heated to death like this. Xiaolan said slowly. After listening to his words, the Angel Yan on the side counted 21 points. The fifth generation divine body has the possibility of unlimited survival in a certain sense, just like our Angel King Holy Kesha, whose fifth generation divine body is the sacred atomic technology. In this case, even if he is turned into powder or even blasted into an atom, he will gradually recover. It's just that this process is very slow. In some cases, he is indeed an immortal existence, and Huayi is most likely a black hole technology forcibly enhanced by the black hole engine, which is specifically manifested in the terrifying attack ability. As far as we know, he can even rub a black hole with his hands, and the black hole he rubs out may not even be controlled by himself. As for resurrection, he should not have it. After listening to Angel Yan's series of words, Jezzalan nodded slowly at this time. I hope so. It's better that this terrifying, evil and shameless existence will not be resurrected. If you kill him, he will be resurrected again. In this case, it will make people feel quite speechless and surprised. By the way, you just mentioned this knowledge, we also have it on Earth. Doesn't that mean that, if Blue Star develops the heat death cannon, our Earth can directly replicate it? 1:1. In this case, can we also be considered to have mastered the ultimate power? Jezzalan said curiously, with a little excitement in his eyes. In his opinion, if this situation can really be achieved, then he can directly take this cannon and shoot at Karl. Let the other party invade the Earth, and he will make the other party disappear completely. At this time, Angel Yan shook his head. It's not what you think. There are some things that we understand differently. Maybe many of the things you see are like this, and you do know some knowledge and some technology, but it doesn't mean that if the other party can make it, you can also make it. For example, heat death. Not only the Earth, even our Angel civilization has done some research on this, and has sufficient and complete theoretical knowledge. We even know the ultimate effect of heat death, the production principle of heat death, and the final effect of heat death, but even so, we don't have the ability and qualifications to make it a reality. But Blue Star can. This is the gap between us, so don't think about these unrealistic methods. It's best to study dimensional technology honestly. After listening to Angel Yan's words at this time, Jezzalan also nodded slowly. He naturally knew that such opportunistic things were unlikely to exist. Perhaps in the eyes of many people, all kinds of technologies on Blue Star are opportunistic and all cheating. But the other party can cheat again and again, which undoubtedly means that this is the other party's real experience. But the Earth does not have such ability. In this case, if the so-called opportunistic trick is really copied, then the probability that they will be greeted is not a friendly exchange. It is likely to be a sufficiently severe blow. If a civilization wants to develop normally, there are three things that cannot be avoided. The first is the strong technological attack capability. Only this can prevent other civilizations from causing harm to them. Or dare not fight with them. The second is a strong enough defense capability. Only in this way can they develop faster without being afraid of the consequences. Always prevent attacks from other civilizations. As for the third, it is the power of sustainable development. This is a most important. There is no peak in any technology. When you find that the technology you are studying has reached its peak. This does not mean that the technology has reached its peak. But your research ability has reached its peak. In this case, if you do not continue to develop, there is only one outcome in the end, that is defeat. Everyone knows this, even it was Jezzalan, and he also understood it. If they don't have enough power for sustainable development, they will be caught up by others sooner or later. For example, Blue Star. The technology and power that Blue Star has now are very strong. But if the other party no longer studies some new technologies, and no longer gradually becomes stronger, then other civilizations will sooner or later be able to fully understand the other party's technology. At that time, everyone will be at the same level of civilization. War will break out. Because no one will allow a civilization level that is not far beyond their own civilization. So fighting must happen. But there will be no such fighting now. Because Blue Star is enough to surpass them all. If everyone really fights, Blue Star will even destroy all civilizations in just a few days, or at most a month. All destroyed. It is precisely because of this truth. So at this time, Jezzalan didn't even want to say anything. They and Blue Star are like a pair of twin brothers, but now the other party has grown step by step, and has grown into a towering existence. And they are basically the same as before. Chapter 68, Killing Huayi with one shot, and creating a heat death universe. time flies by. Point the superheat death cannon has been made. Point Lu Xuan looked at the huge superheat death cannon in the sky. Point there was a little excitement in his eyes. He walked over, reached out and touched it, and the next moment he felt an extreme heat. Chief, you have to be careful. You can't touch this thing casually, the scientist next to him said with some concern. Point after hearing the other party's words, Lu Xuan's mouth slowly showed some smiles. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Lu Xuan certainly knew what I was doing. Point after all, he made this thing himself. Point in this case, if even he didn't know what I was doing, point then who else would know what I was doing? He shook his head slowly, and he didn't say much, but spoke to the scientist next to him. Now, we can prepare for the test launch. Has the target been explored? Hearing his words, the scientist on the opposite side nodded repeatedly. The target has been explored. I have locked onto that space and can be ready to launch at any time. There was a little light in his eyes, and he did not hesitate at this moment. Point after seeing this scene, Lu Xuan on the opposite side also nodded repeatedly. You did a good job. Now charge up and prepare to launch. Received, Master Chief. As their voices fell. Point the terrifying heat death cannon was directly activated. Point the huge amount of heat began to be continuously absorbed by it. Point this scene was naturally exposed in the repertoire. Point angel civilization. Point after seeing this scene, Kesha raised her eyebrows slightly. What the hell is this? Why is this happening now? Where is he aiming now? Could it be that two-dimensional space? Does he really want to use this cannon to kill Huayi directly? He said slowly, with a little excitement in his eyes, although Huayi's death was also a kind of difficulty and helplessness for him. Point after all, that was a super life at the same level as him. Point but if the other party really died, then he would only be excited. Point after all, Huayi had caused them too much damage at the beginning. Point in this case, if Huayi could die, no angel would be unhappy. I wonder if Huayi can be killed this time. If he really dies, then we have to rejudge the situation of Blue Star. He said slowly, with a little bit of vigilance in his eyes. Xing next to him glanced at him and said slowly, Queen, if Huayi really dies, then what should we do? According to the current situation, what we have to do is not particularly simple. In this case, if we force a conflict with Blue Star, maybe we will be finished. He murmured, with more helplessness and fear in his eyes. That's right, it's fear. The entire Blue Star has become a super scary thing for all of them. Point it is precisely because of this super scary thing that they feel pain, sorrow, and astonishment. Point these things undoubtedly make them feel surprised. Point no one thinks that there will be no problems with such things. All angels will feel fear because the thing in the sky had already exceeded their imagination. Point the others looked at each other and lowered their heads without saying anything more. Point because they all know that in such a situation, everything changes at this time. Kesha took a deep breath and then spoke. No need to be so defensive. We are now on the same front as the entire known civilization. Under such circumstances, it is undoubtedly extremely difficult for Blue Star to attack us. There is no need to be afraid of these in the short term, he said softly, with a little uncertainty in his eyes. Indeed, with the ferocious appearance of Blue Star, all civilizations should feel fear. All of them should not provoke each other. Point because no one knows whether the other party will take action directly and crush them completely. Point but when Blue Star really descends on this starfield. Point as long as any civilization surrenders first, then all other low-level civilizations will rush over because for them, it is nothing more than changing a ruler, and there is not much change. Point but for the angel civilization, this is impossible. Point they will never give away everything they have directly. Point this is not the style of their angels. I hope Blue Star's arrival can be later, and I hope Huayi can hold on for a while longer. If he can hold on, there won't be too many problems on our side. Caesar said slowly, with a little helplessness in his eyes. Yes, it was indeed helpless for him now. He no longer knew what kind of changes would happen in the world. Point you have to know that what he wants to do is not what he once thought. Point now he has no other choice but to wait. Point Earth. Point Jedi Island looked at the scene in the sky, his mouth twitching slightly. It's true. Line crossing made that thing to kill Huayi. Ha ha ha. Huayi really can't escape this time. After all, his strength is not as strong as imagined. He said excitedly, with a sharp smile in his eyes. After listening to his words, the angel dragon on the side looked at him and nodded. Yes, that position is definitely where Hua Yi is. This time when the heat death cannon is fired, Hua Yi will most likely not be able to escape, and this time, we can also see Hua Yi's death. I just don't know if Hua Yi, as a 5th generation divine body, can survive under this ultimate energy. If he can survive, then the 5th generation divine body is still a super powerful ability, and we can still develop in this direction. But if he can't survive, then everything will change. At least for us now, we don't need to do those things at all. What we need to do now, or do we need to wait until everything changes, and the final outcome is determined? Only then can we plan the next step according to the outcome. Otherwise, with the situation we are facing now, there is only one final outcome, that is death. Angel Dragon has not returned to the angel civilization for a long time. It's not that he doesn't want to go back, but there is no need to go back now. For him now, everything they can see has changed. Angel civilization doesn't need such a strong fighting force as him. Or the enemy they are facing now doesn't need such a strong fighting ability. The opponent is indeed strong and terrifying. It is precisely in this situation that they have no way to do anything else. Because ordinary combat units don't even have the ability to resist in front of them. Instead of waiting over there, it's better to stay here. Anyway, both sides are in similar situations. Blue star. The terrifying fluctuations began to flicker. The huge light lit up in an instant. The next moment, accompanied by a huge roar. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69, Studying Time, The Horror of Blue Planet. But why do we want to create that universe? Is it because of the chief? Do you also think that the heat death universe is the end of the entire universe? The scientist spoke in surprise, with curiosity in his eyes. After listening to the other party's words, Lu Xuan smiled slowly and said, "No, there are many ways to end the universe, but it is definitely not the heat death universe. After all, in such a void, even our civilization will be destroyed, so I will never let the universe really become like that, and what I want to do is because of time." The scientists around looked at each other, and they didn't understand why heat death and time are related. If you really want to study time, then you should study something specifically used to catch up with time. Instead of heat death. So, what is the relationship between heat death and time? The scientist couldn't help asking. At this time, Lu Xuan's mouth slowly curled up and said directly, "It's very simple. There is only one relationship between heat death and time, that is, the closer to heat death, the faster the flow of time. In other words, if we create a heat death universe, the speed of time flowing in the center of the heat death universe is likely to be hundreds or even thousands of times faster than that of the outside universe. So a year has passed outside, but 1,000 years have passed inside." When he said this, Xuan's eyes lit up slightly. He knew what the result would be. He also understood that under such circumstances, the entire blue star would develop to such a terrifying level. After hearing Lu Xuan's words, the pupils of the scientists around him shrank slightly. Just now they hadn't figured out what was going on, but now they all knew. If it is really as Lu Xuan said, in the heat death universe, the flow rate is thousands of times that of the outside universe. Then, as long as they master the ability to survive and study in the heat death universe. Then, it only takes a short time to quickly catch up with those civilizations that have grown for tens of thousands of years. This is the only way to equalize their direct time gap. Angel civilization. Caesar frowned slightly. How is it possible? If they are developing such an ability, then as long as they stay in there for a year and come out, we can't see what they have become at all. This is really terrifying. He slowly breathed a sigh of relief, with a little bit of fear in his eyes. At first he didn't think there was anything wrong But now he finally knew how powerful is the heat death universe that Lu Xuan studied. It is now known that compared with other civilizations in the universe, the only thing that is powerful about Lu Xuan's civilization is actually time. They have plenty of time. They have powerful time, and it is precisely because of this time that they have enough power, although it seems that Lu Xuan has caught up with them and even completely surpassed them. But the background and technology they have mastered are enough to help them hold on for a while. At least this is what they think in their hearts. But if the situation changes, if everything in front of them becomes different, if the other party really studies the so-called heat death universe that can control time and really study at their in the end, they will face a terrifying behemoth that surpasses everything. Taking a deep breath, everyone's eyes shrank slightly at this moment. Confidence spoke more carefully. What should we do in this situation now? Why don't we also study that heat death universe? If we can study such a universe, maybe we can also crack Blue Star's technology in a short time. At that time, it's not impossible to directly use such technology to destroy the other party. At least we have the power to resist. He spoke with a little expectation, waiting for Kesha's order. However, Kesha only thought for a moment and finally shook her head. No, the power we have now can't do these things, because we don't have that ability at all. He sighed slowly, his eyes full of helplessness. They heard all the knowledge and technology about heat death that Lu Xuan had explained before. But they just heard it. After hearing that, everything has changed for them now. They don't even have a way to change it. They can't research that kind of new technology. For them, everything seems to have been frozen. Their technology can no longer grow rapidly again. And there is no peace on the Blue Star Demon civilization. Liang Bing frowned slowly, and he spoke softly. It seems that this time we are facing a terrifying zero. I just don't know what kind of super technology this civilization can research in the end. A place where the flow of time is completely different. A place that can grow in a year and grow into 1,000 years. No matter which civilization, it is completely incomprehensible. For us, what we see now is also completely incomprehensible. By that time, Blue Star will surpass us all and will crush us like ants outside. It is even possible that they have researched the power of more than a dozen dimensions by that time. All we have is death, he said slowly, with a little fear in his eyes. That's right, even Liang Bing, who was studying the ultimate fear, felt fear at this moment. Because of this fear, he felt helpless, painful, and at a loss at this time. Arnold on the side frowned and spoke. My queen, if it is the power of heat death, can we also study it? As long as we rely on our strength, such a power can be studied first. We can also drill into the so-called place, where 10 years can be equivalent to 1,000 years. By that time, we can also become stronger directly. We don't even need to be afraid of the so-called Blue Star Sister, and we don't need to be afraid of the civilization on Kesha's side. It is normal to completely destroy them, he said slowly, with a hint of excitement in his eyes. However, after hearing his words, the two of them thought for a moment and finally shook their heads. No, our technology is not enough, our personnel are not enough, and we don't have enough resources to study those things. You must know that the leaders of Blue Star have to make a universe into a heat death universe, and the premise of life is to completely master the power of heat death. And in addition, there must be another universe. And now, we have no way to go to other universes for us. Even if we really research this heat death power, we can only use it as a weapon in the end. He sighed slowly, his eyes flashing with more helplessness, because at this moment, he has completely discovered what kind of situation he is facing. Fear, sorrow, and pain. Everything is flowing. They can't do anything. What Blue Star wants to study is the terrifying power of time. It's not other ordinary abilities, it's time that transcends everything, he said slowly, with fear in his eyes at this moment. He already knew that he couldn't catch up with Blue Star, no matter what. Earth. Jezziel slowly frowned. Time, does this kind of power really exist? If the other party can really research time, then what else can we do? Don't we have to wait for death? Even if the other party fails in their research, you can use time to reset it. Xianalan said slowly. There was a sharp fear in his eyes. Angel Yan on the side glanced at him and nodded slowly. You are right. The situation in this world is indeed beyond our imagination. What we see is completely different. If Blue Star can really study time successfully for other civilizations, it is undoubtedly a thorough blow. We can't even do anything. We can only wait for death. Zao Xing carried a big gun on the side with an angry face. Why can we only wait for death? Chapter 70. I understand you. Lu Xuan had a special wristband on his arm, and he was looking at a huge map. This map was the plate where the entire Blue Star was located, and he was in the central area of the plate. His eyes looked at a city on the other side. From there, you can see that the other end of this world is a barren area with no signs of life. What's going on? Why are our time and space and the plate where Blue Star is located two different worlds? These two worlds seem to be isolated. Is this the so-called time and space turbulence? He murmured, his eyes full of doubts. Then he restrained his mood and walked away. Because he knew that the closest area to the Blue Star was this area. As long as he shuttled through it, he could reach Blue Star. However, on this journey, Lu Xuan met many strange people. All of these people were 3 meters tall, with bulging muscles, fierce faces, and a strong aura of evil all over their bodies. They were burly and strong, and a punch would have hundreds of tons of power. Even a skyscraper is just a piece of wood under their fists. Who are these guys? Why are they so powerful? Lu Xuan narrowed his eyes slightly. With a trace of horror in his eyes, he found that the physical fitness of this group of people was very strong. Even a strong man like him who had condensed the godhood could not stand it. Chapter 71. It's really scary. After hearing what Lu Xuan said, the burly man's face suddenly brightened, and he asked urgently, "What are you waiting for? Follow me quickly." Then, the burly man was about to lead Lu Xuan forward, but was stopped by Lu Xuan. "Wait, tell me first, what happened between the plate where Blue Star is located and here? I always feel that the humans on Blue Star and the creatures here seem to be out of harmony." Lu Xuan asked 957. The environment here is completely different from that of Blue Star, but he felt something that did not belong to Blue Star in this land. We don't know either. The plate we are in seems to be divided into two parallel worlds from here, and I suspect that this place should be related to the Earth. Maybe we can borrow the power of the Earth to send us out of this area and return to the world that originally belonged to Blue Star. After hearing his words, Lu Xuan's eyes flashed with a gleam of brilliance. If they can really borrow the power of the Earth, doesn't it mean that they can soon leave this space and return to the world that originally belonged to them? Thinking of this, Lu Xuan couldn't help but get excited. Although this space was created by him, the longer he stayed in this space, the more reluctant Lu Xuan was to leave this space. He couldn't help but imagine that one day he could return to his hometown and enjoy that wonderful life again. At this time, the burly man suddenly patted Lu Xuan's shoulder, interrupting his reverie. "Brother, no matter what you think, now is the time when we can't protect ourselves. I suggest you throw away those messy ideas in your mind." The voice of the burly man fell on Lu Xuan's ears, instantly woke him up, and he touched his nose awkwardly. "Sorry, I just lost my composure." The burly man shook his head and then continued to run forward. Lu Xuan followed closely behind him and rushed forward. Not long after, the two of them entered a vast cave. And here is the place where humans live on Blue Star. Be careful, it's dangerous here. The burly man lowered his voice to remind. Lu Xuan nodded slightly and then followed everyone to continue running into the cave. Suddenly, the figures in front disappeared one after another. Chapter 72. It's really scary. Lu Xuan sighed, and seeing that these silly hares didn't know how to run away, he walked towards them directly. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Just when Lu Xuan was about to approach the hares, suddenly, the hares all jumped up and pounced on Lu Xuan with their teeth and claws. "Heh, stupid beasts." Lu Xuan snorted coldly, then suddenly raised his right arm, spread his 5 fingers into eagle claws, and swung them fiercely, and a series of wind-breaking sounds instantly exploded. A terrifying gale swept in all directions. Bang! A hare was turned into meat and exploded before it even reacted. 21. Lu Xuan did not hesitate and quickly attacked the remaining hares. In just 3 seconds, the whole valley became quiet, and there was no sound anymore. Only blood dyed the whole land red, which was shocking. Lu Xuan restrained his evil spirit and walked straight into the distance. Behind him, the bodies of wild rabbits were lying on the ground. Lu Xuan successfully came to the depths. At this time, many people had gathered in the depths. Everyone had a strong anxiety on their faces and looked very irritable. Their goal was an altar at the highest point. The altar was surrounded by bones, as if it had experienced a tragic fight. Everyone, please pay attention to order and don't cause a riot. A male staff member in white clothes shouted to everyone. The white-clothed staff member looked like a tour guide. Lu Xuan looked at the staff member carefully and found that he exuded a strong aura all over his body. He was obviously a strong man. But when Lu Xuan was observing him, the staff member was also looking at Lu Xuan carefully. Chapter 73 still continuing. The fight between the man and the woman continued. Their fight had lasted for a day and a night. Both of them had exhausted their physical strength and spiritual energy. They were exhausted and could not hold on any longer. The man was panting and sweat poured down his forehead like rain. Unlike the man, the woman was not depressed at all. Her eyes were always sharp. I told you, you are not my opponent at all. The woman sneered and then suddenly attacked with a sharp breath whistling. The man gritted his teeth and tried his best to block this attack. Bang. The man shot backwards and fell heavily to the ground. Let's end it, the woman said gloomily. Swish. However, just when the woman was about to use her ultimate move to defeat the man, a strange phenomenon suddenly occurred. The lake water, which was originally as calm as a mirror lake, was violently churning at this moment, and a vortex formed in the lake water. Then, a huge suction force burst out from the center of the lake, wrapped the woman, dragged her into the whirlpool, and disappeared on the spot. Could it be that something really happened? The man looked at the disappeared woman and was extremely worried. Just when the man was distracted, the surrounding lake water fluctuated violently, and then a head popped out of the lake. Boy, do you still want to run? The man looked at the head in the lake. His pupils shrank slightly. Lu Xuan slowly climbed out of the lake. His body had been corroded and pitted. There were fine blood stains on the surface of his skin, and blood seeped out, looking very scary. I told you, you can't escape, Lu Xuan said coldly. How are you still alive? The man stared at Lu Xuan on the shore with his eyes wide open, his eyes full of disbelief. Chapter 74 To Kind. He originally thought that he could dominate the world with his strength in the early stage of Tangshan realm, but what happened today overturned his idea. Lu Xuan walked slowly to the man, lowered his head, and stared at him, and slowly said, I will give you one last chance. Tell me the secret of the sealed place, otherwise. As soon as the voice fell, a silver light instantly cut through the void and slashed on the man's shoulder, and blood was spilled in an instant. Lu Xuan opened the 5 fingers of his right hand, and a ball of purple gold flame appeared in his hand. He looked up at the man and said indifferently, don't force me to burn it. Lu Xuan's tone was very calm, but it sounded like a spell in the man's ears, deeply shocking his heart. 300 The man's eyes showed fear, because he saw the purple gold flame, the destructive power, which made him tremble all over. What kind of existence is that? His body couldn't help shaking. He was unwilling to give in, but he didn't want to joke with his life. He hadn't forgotten the flame in Lu Xuan's hand, which was definitely a nightmare for him. The secret of the sealed land is on the altar. The man gritted his teeth and growled. Lu Xuan nodded slightly, waved his right hand, and the flame went out immediately. The man breathed a sigh of relief, finally out of danger. Thank you for sparing my life. My name is Chen Yang, and I will repay you in the future. Chen Yang bowed to Lu Xuan. Lu Xuan waved his hand, indicating that there was no need to be polite, and then said, don't be polite, I was also entrusted by someone. Chen Yang was stunned when he heard this and asked in confusion, entrusted by someone? Who? Lu Xuan glanced at Chen Yang and said nothing. Chen Yang smiled awkwardly and said, in that case, I will take my leave first. Chapter 75 Lifelike. Lu Xuan took back his hand, and Chen Yang's eyes returned to normal, but there was still fear and disbelief in his eyes. What? Don't you understand? Lu Xuan said lightly. Chen Yang shook his head blankly. He had no idea what Lu Xuan had done. Lu Xuan pondered for a moment, then said, your soul is now controlled by me. From now on, you will become my slave." Hearing Lu Xuan's words, Chen Yang's eyes suddenly widened. He looked at Lu Xuan in disbelief. Lu Xuan's words made him completely dumbfounded. He could never have thought that his fate would end like this. "My name is Lu Xuan, and I will be your master from now on," Lu Xuan said lightly. "Master, master." Chen Yang swallowed his saliva and said with difficulty, "Well." Lu Xuan nodded in response. "Master, what can I do to help you get rid of the restraints?" Chen Yang asked tentatively. He was afraid of angering Lu Xuan. Lu Xuan glanced at him lightly and uttered 2 words warmly: "Refine, refine." Chen Yang's pupils shrank suddenly and his heart beat violently. Lu Xuan did not give him too much time to refute. A purple gold flame quietly emerged and hovered in front of Chen Yang. "If you don't want to, I will forcibly impose a ban and seal your strength. At that time, you can only let me slaughter you." Lu Xuan's cold voice came into Chen Yang's ears. Chen Yang's body sat up. Born, of course he didn't want to be Lu Xuan's slave, but he had to consider whether Lu Xuan would really cripple him. His face was full of struggling and tangled expressions, and finally he nodded and said, "Okay, I promise the master." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.